Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time, way back, to the moment when the air first turns sharp, the fields glisten with white, and you realize the warm days are gone. Imagine trudging along a muddy path as the evening falls, your breath coming out in little clouds, and every step squelching against frozen earth. It's the Middle Ages, and unlike today, you don't have a thermostat, a heated blanket, or even a draft-proof door. Winter isn't just a season, it's an opponent, one that can take you down if you're careless. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without a little bit of luck and a whole lot of grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments, because I always love knowing where my bedtime travelers are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a village. Wooden huts huddled together like geese in a storm. The sun dips low, staining the sky with cold purple, and you feel that first real bite of winter on your cheeks. In the medieval world, this isn't a romantic snow globe moment. It's the warning bell that hunger, frostbite, and long nights are marching closer. You pull your patched wool cloak tighter, though the wind slips right through it like a rude neighbor who never knocks. The village itself seems to shrink when winter comes. Cattle are herded in, fields go bare, and smoke curls reluctantly from thatched roofs. Life contracts. The summer markets are gone, the traveling peddlers disappear, and you're left with what you've stored, salted, and scraped together. Historians still argue whether people feared famine or freezing more during these months, but honestly, both were terrifying enough to keep you awake at night. Imagine standing at the threshold of your hut. The door creaks, it's just rough boards lashed with iron nails, and as you step inside, a wall of smoky air greets you. The smell is a cocktail of damp wool, onions hanging in the rafters, and maybe a hint of pig manure drifting in from the back corner. You wrinkle your nose, but this is home, and it's what stands between you and the icy dark outside. The bitter chill isn't polite. It sneaks through every crack in the timber, every hole the mice gnawed last summer. You can feel the cold crawling along the packed earth floor, reaching your toes, even through your shoes. No insulation, no double glazing, just you versus the wind, and you already know who's going to win unless you play smart. You glance at the fire pit in the center of the single room. There's a smoldering log left from earlier in the day, glowing faintly like a stubborn ember. That fire isn't just cozy background, it's survival. Without it, your hut would turn into a meat locker in a matter of hours. The irony, though, is that the smoke has nowhere proper to go. A hole in the roof lets some of it out, but most of it just hangs around like an uninvited guest. You cough, eyes watering, but you also know that smoke helps preserve the timbers, keeps insects away, and maybe, just maybe, it's a thin layer of warmth against the rafters. Outside, frost creeps across the village like an artist with a white brush. Roofs sparkle under the moonlight, puddles harden into glass, and the once friendly fields look like frozen battlegrounds. You remember the last harvest. It wasn't great. The rye grew patchy, the beans were wormy, and everyone muttered about an early frost cutting things short. Now, those whispers echo louder, because what you stored might not be enough to carry you through to spring. And here's the kicker. You can't just pop to the store. Your pantry is what you dug, dried, salted, or smoked months ago. That barrel of salted herring suddenly looks less like a luxury and more like a lifesaver. You already know by February, you'll be so tired of eating the same dried peas and turnips that you'd sell your soul for a banana. Except you have no clue what a banana even is. But the night isn't about food, yet it's about warmth. You look around. Your children are chasing each other across the straw-covered floor, their bare feet smacking against earth. Their cheeks are red from the cold, but they're laughing, their little bodies radiating the kind of energy only kids can summon in freezing weather. One of them grabs your hand, pulling you closer to the fire, and you let yourself sink into the dim orange glow. You've been warned about what happens if the cold gets inside your bones. Older villagers talk about the winter of famine, when people froze in their beds before dawn. They say the snow came early and didn't leave for months, and entire hamlets vanished from maps. Is that true? Historians still debate how widespread such collapses were, but even if the stories are half true, they're enough to make you tuck yourself tighter under your woolen shawl. And the funny part, you don't even think of winter as something unusual. It comes every year, and every year you fight it off like a stubborn fly buzzing around your head. There's no snow day to enjoy. There's just cold, aching work, and the gnawing knowledge that one mistake forgetting to stack firewood, leaving the animals unguarded, spilling the salted meat could tip the scales between survival and disaster. Still, there's beauty in it, even now. Step outside for a moment. The stars above blaze sharper than you've ever seen them in summer, each one a cold pinprick against the velvet black. Your breath hangs like fog, and the snow crunches crisp under your boots. Across the village, you can hear dogs barking, a lullaby of warning and watchfulness. Somewhere in the distance, maybe a wolf answers back. You shiver, not entirely from the chill. Back inside, you sit near the fire, pulling your cloak tighter. You know tonight will be long. The cold doesn't just arrive and pass, it settles in, a constant companion until the thaw. You rub your hands together, thinking of how every peasant around you is performing the same little rituals, clutching warmth wherever they can find it. The whole village is united in this silent battle against the cold, and as you lie down later, your head on a lumpy straw pillow, you remind yourself that this is only the beginning. The frost on the fields is the first warning shot. The real siege of winter is only just beginning, and you're going to need every scrap of warmth, food, and stubbornness you can muster to make it through. The scratching fades, and finally, the night holds still again. The fire has burned down to its last sullen glow, orange buried beneath a mound of gray ash. You know that come dawn, long before the cock crows, someone must coax those embers back to life. Otherwise, you're in for a miserable morning of shivering hands, blowing on damp twigs and praying the wood catches before frost creeps too deep. The duty often falls to you, though sometimes one of the children stirs awake and does it, fumbling with kindling half asleep. You lie there, rehearsing the task in your head. Stir the ashes gently. Uncover the faintest spark. Feed it with straw. Blow steadily until it glows again. You've done it so many times it's almost muscle memory, like breathing. But there's always that moment of dread. What if tonight the fire dies completely? Historians still argue whether medieval peasants ever truly let their fires go out overnight. Some insist the cost of flint was too high to risk, while others believe it was unavoidable during long winters. Either way, you know the feeling. If your hearth goes cold, the whole family suffers. Without heat, water freezes in buckets, bread hardens to stone, and you wake coughing from icy air. It's a gamble you can't afford to lose, so you've learned tricks. You bury the embers deep in ash, sealing their warmth like a secret. You stack logs close together so they smolder slowly, not blaze too fast. Sometimes you even tuck a dried cow pad on top, smoky. Yes, but it keeps coals alive like nothing else. In your world, dung is less waste than wonder. And yet, accidents happen. You recall one winter morning when you awoke to a dark hearth, not a spark left. The air in the hut was so cold you could see your breath thick as fog. Your hands trembled as you tried to strike a spark with flint and steel. Sparks flew, but the straw refused to catch. Panic rose in your chest. Every wasted minute meant colder children, stiffer limbs. After what felt like hours, you finally coaxed a flame. But the memory of that helplessness still haunts you. When things go wrong, you sometimes rely on neighbors. Borrowing fire is an ancient custom, a small kindness that keeps communities alive. You remember trudging through snow with a clay pot, shielding the tiny flame from the wind like it was a newborn child. When you reached your neighbor's hearth, they smiled knowingly and offered not just embers, but a cup of hot broth. Fire isn't just survival, it's trust, it's connection. It's the invisible bond of shared struggle. There's a rhythm to tending the night fire. Each time you stir it, you listen for the crackle. Feel the soft heat against your face, smell the resin of pine or the tang of oak. It becomes almost a companion, a presence that hums and sighs like another member of the household. You whisper to it sometimes, calling it old friend under your breath. And why not? Without it, you'd be nothing but bones in a frozen hut. Quirky beliefs sprout around fire, too. Some say never to spit in the flames, it angers the spirits. Others warn against poking the hearth too roughly, lest sparks carry messages to demons. On the flip side, tossing salt into the fire is said to banish bad luck, while a roaring flame on Christmas Eve means good harvests ahead. You don't know if any of it's true, but when you see sparks fly up the chimney, you can't help but wonder if they're carrying wishes skyward. One winter, your uncle swore he saw faces in the flames. He claimed they were ancestors watching over him, guiding his hand as he stirred the pot. Most folks laughed, but late at night, when the hut is silent and your mind drifts, you sometimes see patterns, two shapes, eyes, even a fleeting smile. Maybe it's just imagination, maybe it's something more. And there's always the danger side of fire. Huts are mostly wood, straw, and thatcha. Single careless ember could devour your world. You never leave the hearth unattended, and you teach the children to respect it as much as they rely on it. The memory of that one family in the next village, who lost everything in a midnight blaze, still clings to your bones. Fire is both savior and destroyer, as unpredictable as winter itself. You turn over on your straw bed, staring at the faint glow that remains. The knowledge that fire still breathes beneath the ash gives you a fragile peace. You let your eyes close, trusting your old friend to hold on until dawn. Tomorrow, you'll stir it back to life, feed it, and let it warm your bread and your bones once more. And perhaps that's the lesson of every winter night. Survival isn't about grand gestures. It's about these small, steady acts, burying embers, guarding them, reviving them each morning. Like the fire, you smolder through hardship, never quite going out, always ready to spark back with new strength. As your breathing slows, you murmur a final half-joke to yourself. Stay alive, little ember. We've got rent to pay tomorrow. Then you let the hum of warmth lull you into a sleep as fragile and as fierce as the last coal beneath the ash. Asterisk, you shuffle deeper into your little hut, shaking the cold from your shoulders. And now you're really starting to notice what stands between you and the freezing night. Your house itself. Calling it a house might be a stretch by modern standards. It's more of a glorified shed with ambitions. The walls are rough timber, the gaps stuffed with whatever you had lying around last autumn. Maybe clay, straw, or even cow dung smeared thick like medieval caulk. It's not pretty, but when the wind howls outside, you're grateful for every crumbly smear holding the drafts at bay. The roof above you isn't tile, slate, or anything fancy. It's thatch, bundled reeds and straw, piled thick and sloping steep to let the rain slide off. In summer, it looks almost cheerful, golden and soft, but in winter, it becomes your battleground. Snow piles heavy, and if you're unlucky, the dampness sinks in, dripping cold rivulets right into your bed. Thatched roofs were marvels of cheap engineering, but insulation? Let's just say they worked about as well as wrapping yourself in a giant, leaky sponge. You sit near the wall and feel the icy draft leaking in through a gap. The truth is, these homes weren't built for comfort, they were built fast, built cheap, and built by hands that were more familiar with plows than chisels. Your insulation is basically wishful thinking reinforced with mud. Still, compared to sleeping outside, this timber box is practically a palace. Historians still argue whether peasants built them to last for decades, or just patched them year by year until they collapsed. But either way, you're thankful for the roof, no matter how drafty. Now imagine the inside. It's one room, maybe two, if your family's lucky. The floor is hard-packed dirt, sometimes strewn with rushes or straw to keep it from turning into a sticky mud pit. Those rushes are swapped out now and then, though now and then could mean once a year, which means, yes, you're probably sleeping with last summer's crumbs, mouse droppings, and the faint aroma of goat, and you're wondering why you keep sneezing. But here's the genius of peasant survival. People didn't just complain about drafts, they adapted. Cracks in the walls got stuffed with moss or old rags. Roof leaks were patched with clay or more straw. Families hung tapestries, not as decoration but as draft blockers. And if you were dirt poor, well, you hung whatever you could: sacks, animal hides, even bundles of sticks. Anything to keep the night air from whistling through. It wasn't all bad. A thatched roof, for instance, could be surprisingly warm when kept dry. Birds nested in it, insects too, which, okay, is less than ideal when something buzzes in your ear at 2 a.m., but at least it meant insulation of a sort. Some people even swore the smoke from the hearth helped seal the thatch, turning it into a natural barrier. Was that science? Maybe not, but when your best technology is a broom and a bucket, you take any theory that seems to work. You wander over to the corner where your tools hang, wooden handles worn smooth from years of use. The walls creak under the wind's push, but they hold. Your breath fogs in front of you, and you wonder how much colder it would be outside, with nothing but sky over your head. That thought alone makes this smoky, cramped hut feel a little like sanctuary. It's easy to romanticize medieval cottages as cozy little hobbit holes. But the reality was far less charming. Damp, dark, drafty, and smelling like a petting zoo on laundry day. And here's the twist: your body adjusts. You grow up in this environment, and the idea of central heating is as alien as space travel. When you crawl under your blanket, you don't dream of radiators. You dream of enough thatch to keep the snow off. You hear a creak in the rafters, and glance up. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's that family of mice that moved in last month. You sigh, because you know tomorrow morning you'll see fresh chew marks on the grain sack. The medieval home was never truly yours. You shared it with insects, rodents, and sometimes even birds. You're living in what's basically a wildlife hostel with very relaxed rules. Still, it's the heart of survival. This hut, crude as it is, keeps you alive when winter nights drop below freezing. Step outside and linger too long, and the frost gnaws at your fingertips and toes. Stay inside, and the smoke stings your eyes, but at least you're alive to complain about it. Scholars might debate the lifespan of these houses, but the people inside them, they learned quickly that survival wasn't about comfort, it was about endurance. You curl against the wall, pulling your cloak tight, and you can hear the roof creak again. Snow is falling outside, thick and heavy. Tomorrow, you'll have to climb up there and brush it off before the thatch collapses. And that means cold fingers and a slippery roof. But for tonight, you're grateful. Grateful for the patchy straw walls, the smoke that drives you half mad, and the way the timber holds. Just enough to keep the night outside where it belongs. The fire pit crackles faintly in the middle of your little hut, and you shuffle closer to it, the way a moth drifts toward flame. That small, smoky hearth isn't just decoration, it's the beating heart of winter survival. Without it, the cold would creep in like an assassin, settling into your bones before you even realize what's happening. But here's the truth. Medieval hearth fires were kind of terrible by modern standards. No chimney, no sleek iron stove, no tidy just a circle of stones in the center of the dirt floor, maybe with a ring of clay to stop sparks from scattering too far. The smoke from burning oak or pine rises upward, but instead of escaping neatly through a chimney, It swirls around the room first, filling your eyes and throat with sting. A hole in the roof if you remembered to leave one axe as the exit. But more often than not, the smoke simply lingers, curling around the rafters like a lazy ghost. You sit cross-legged on the floor, coughing into your sleeve, but you stay near that fire anyway. The heat radiates unevenly, warming your face while your back still feels like an ice block. It's a cruel joke. To get warm, you have to tolerate a miniature smokehouse inside your house. Still, you know the smoke has hidden perks. It chases away fleas and lice, your least favorite roommates, and it helps cure meats hanging in the rafters. Think of it as medieval Febreze, minus the lavender scent. If you're lucky, your family has kept the fire smoldering all day, feeding it with small twigs so it never dies. Starting a new fire isn't easy. Forget matches. You've got flint, steel, and tinder, and if you're not patient, you're just wasting sparks in the dark. Some families even carried fire from one house to another, like sacred treasure, because relighting from scratch could take hours. Now, imagine the woodpile. You probably stacked logs back in autumn, praying you cut enough before the frost set in. Firewood isn't just fuel, it's life insurance. Run out too soon, and you'll be shivering through Lent with nothing but prayers to warm you. In some regions, people resorted to burning peat, dried dung, or bundles of reeds. Doesn't smell great, but desperate times call for creative fuel. Historians still argue whether dung fires gave more heat or more smoke, but the peasants burning it probably didn't care about the debate. They just wanted their toes unfrozen. You poke the fire with a stick, sparks leaping upward. The sound of crackling wood fills the hut, oddly comforting. Outside, the wind howls against the door, but in here, you've carved out a pocket of warmth. Families often gathered in a circle around the hearth at night, knees pulled up, blankets wrapped tight, telling stories or simply staring at the flames. It wasn't just about heat, it was about connection. The fire was the medieval television, central and mesmerizing, with flames instead of flickering pixels. But even with fire, the nights could be brutal. The farther you sit from the flames, the colder it gets. Corners of the hut stay icy, damp air settling in like a second occupant. You can almost hear the frost creeping through cracks, chewing at the edges of the warmth. That's why everyone huddled close, not just for company, but because the hearth's reach was small, and you couldn't afford to waste an inch of it. Picture this. The last log burns low, glowing red. You're nodding off, eyelids heavy, but someone has to keep the embers alive. If they die, you'll wake 2 frozen water buckets and a frantic scramble to restart the flame. So, you take turns. One person pokes the ashes, shifts the logs, adds twigs. It's a nightly vigil, a quiet ritual of survival. You might not fight wolves at your door, but you do battle with the cold. One ember at a time. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval villagers swore that fire wasn't just heat, it was protection. They believed spirits and goblins prowled the dark, and a glowing hearth acted like a force field. Let the fire die, and you weren't just cold. You were vulnerable to whatever lurked in the night. Whether that was superstition or just clever motivation to keep the fire alive, who can say? Historians still debate how much of daily peasant life was practical habit versus spiritual belief. But either way, the fire was both shield and savior. Of course, there was risk. Sparks leaping from the hearth could set thatched roofs ablaze, and with no fire brigade in sight, one stray ember could turn a whole village into ash by morning. That's why some families spread damp clay around the hearth, or hung iron pots above the flames, catching sparks before they flew too far. You lived with constant tension. Keep the fire strong enough to fight the cold, but tame enough not to eat your home. You glance into the pot hanging over the flames now, stew bubbling faintly. That heat isn't waste. It's your dinner simmering while it warms the room. Every medieval peasant understood efficiency. One fire for light, warmth, and food. Tonight's stew smells faintly of cabbage and onions, maybe a sliver of salted pork if you're lucky. You know it'll taste smoky, but in winter, smoky means survival. Outside, the night grows colder. You hear the snap of frost on branches, the distant yip of a fox. But inside, you're anchored to this tiny sun in the middle of your hut. The fire hisses as another log catches, the glow brightening faces around you. Children curl against each other, drowsy, their eyelids flickering in rhythm with the flames. Your partner hums softly, tending the pot, eyes reflecting the fire's dance, and you're struck by the realization that this hearth is everything. It's your defense against the season, your cooktop, your light, and your gathering place. Without it, winter would swallow you whole. With it, you can almost pretend the cold outside doesn't exist, at least until morning. The fire is fickle, smoky, dangerous, but you can't live without it. You sigh, stretch your hands toward the warmth, and let yourself relax, even as the smoke stings your eyes one last time. Tomorrow will bring new battles with frost, but tonight, this glowing circle is enough to keep you alive. Asterisk, you shuffle away from the smoky hearth, eyes still stinging, and look toward the corner where your bed waits. Bed might be a generous term. Forget plush mattresses and fluffy pillows. What you collapse onto each night is a rough sack, stuffed with straw, sometimes hay, if that's all you could spare. Though hay is better suited for hungry cows than for weary humans. The sack scratches against your skin, and when you shift, you hear the telltale crunch of stalks breaking inside. Welcome to medieval luxury. You lower yourself onto it, wincing slightly as a stalk pokes through the thin linen sheet covering the sack. If you're lucky, you have woolen blankets layered on top. If you're not, you've got your cloak and maybe a patched up sheepskin that still smells faintly of the animal it came from. Either way, your straw bed is better than the floor, which is icy enough to steal warmth right through your bones. The truth is, these straw mattresses weren't meant to last. After a season or two, they grew lumpy, smelly, and alive with little creatures that loved the mix of warmth, crumbs, and skin flakes. Lice, fleas, and mites, your uninvited roommates, nestled in deep. The term hitting the hay makes you laugh a little, because in your case, it's literal, and also a gamble. Some peasants thumped the bedding with sticks before lying down, just to flush out whatever was crawling inside. Did it work? Not really, but at least it gave the illusion of control. You lie back, staring up at the smoky rafters. The smell of straw fills your nose, sweet at first, but tinged with dust. It tickles your throat, makes you cough. Still, there's something oddly comforting about it. Straw is cheap, abundant after harvest, and easy to replace. In a world where every scrap counts, that's as good as luxury gets. Historians still argue whether wealthier peasants managed feather-stuffed mattresses more often than not, but for most villagers like you, straw was the bedrock of nightly survival. Picture a winter night. You slide under the blankets, pulling them tight against your chin. The straw beneath you is scratchy, but it does its job. It lifts you off the freezing floor, giving at least a little barrier between your body and the cold ground. Without it, you'd feel the earth's chill seeping into your bones by midnight. Some families even spread fresh straw on the floor each winter as makeshift carpeting, both for warmth and for cleanliness, or as close to cleanliness as medieval life got. Now, don't imagine this bed is yours alone. Sleeping arrangements in peasant homes were communal. You, your spouse, your kids, maybe even your parents, everyone piled together, often on the same straw mattress, or in beds pushed right against each other. Privacy. That's a word you'll have to invent later in history. For now, your main concern is warmth, not personal space. The straw creaks as more bodies climb in. Your youngest wriggles against your side, her icy feet pressing into your legs. You grunt, but don't push her away. Every extra body is another furnace. Even your dog curls up near your feet, tail wrapped tight, adding his heat to the pile. Some households even let pigs or goats bed down close at night, their bulk radiating warmth better than any blanket. You wrinkle your nose at the smell, but when frost creeps through the rafters, you're grateful for the living heaters. Of course, straw beds had their quirks. Sparks from the hearth sometimes landed on the floor, and if your bedding was too close, well, let's just say medieval fire safety wasn't OSHA. There are grim stories of whole huts going up in flames while families slept, their straw beds feeding the blaze like dry tinder. You find yourself inching your mattress just a little farther from the fire tonight. Even though that means sacrificing a bit of heat, you shift again, trying to find a comfortable position. A stalk jabs your shoulder, another crackles under your hip. Medieval people didn't expect comfort in the modern sense. They expected survival. Still, some tried to soften the prickly mattress by mixing straw with wool scraps, moss, or even dried leaves. Anything to blunt the edges of the stalks. Was it perfect? Not at all. But when you're exhausted from a day of chopping wood, hauling water, and feeding livestock in the freezing cold, you'll sleep on just about anything. You pull the blanket tighter, listening to the symphony of nighttime sounds. The fire pops, someone nearby snores, and your straw bed squeaks each time you or your children shift. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. Inside, you sink deeper into your scratchy nest, grateful for every ounce of warmth it traps. And here's a funny thought. In some towns, people actually reused old straw from their beds as fertilizer once it got too filthy. Sleep on it all winter, then toss it onto the fields come spring. Nothing wasted, not even the bedding. You imagine future historians wrinkling their noses at that fact. But in your world, it's just common sense. The debate lingers in your mind: were straw mattresses more of a blessing or a curse? Historians still argue whether they improved health by lifting peasants off the damp floor, or worsened it by harboring endless vermin. Lying here, scratching at a flea bite on your wrist, you're leaning toward the latter. But at least you're alive, warm enough to complain, and not curled up on bare earth. As you close your eyes, you remind yourself that this is the rhythm of winter life. You'll wake tomorrow, with straw in your hair, bites on your ankles, and a back stiff from uneven lumps. But you'll also wake, which is the point. In the medieval cold, sometimes survival is all the luxury you can hope for. The straw rustles beneath you as you shift, pulling the blanket tighter, and you realize something obvious. Even with your scratchy mattress and smoky hearth, the real secret to surviving a medieval winter night isn't the fire or the bedding, it's the bodies beside you. You glance around your hut. Everyone is crammed in like spoons in a drawer. Your partner's elbow digs into your ribs. One child is sprawled half across your chest. Another clings to your leg like it's a pillow. And the dog has somehow claimed the warmest spot near your feet. Cozy? Not exactly. Effective. Absolutely. Medieval families knew instinctively what modern science later confirmed. Shared body heat works like magic. One person wrapped in a cloak loses warmth quickly, but 5 people crammed under the same wool blanket. That's a furnace powered by human breath and skin. The cold drafts sneaking through the walls don't stand a chance against a pile of snoring peasants. This was standard practice. Families slept in groups, not out of sentimentality, but out of necessity. Beds were expensive to build, blankets even more so, and warmth was a resource best conserved together. Historians still argue whether this arrangement strengthened family bonds, or just made everyone crankier in the morning. But you don't have time to debate, you're too busy fighting for blanket real estate against a determined 5-year-old. Animals, too, joined the pile. Chickens tucked themselves on rafters, cats padded silently around the straw, and pigs sometimes plopped right down on the dirt near the fire. In harsh winters, even larger animals, calves or goats, might be allowed inside. Their warmth was priceless, and their bodies acted like furry radiators. The downside? You also got barnyard smells, muddy hooves, and the occasional surprise on the floor by morning. But again, comfort ranked far below survival. You cough lightly into the smoky air. The fire is still glowing, but the chill presses in from the edges of the room. You shift closer to your partner, who mumbles something incoherent in her sleep. The children nestle tighter, their breath warm against your skin. There's no privacy, no quiet space, but as the night deepens, you understand that this heap of family and livestock is your strongest shield against the bitter cold. Imagine the scene in a larger hut. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, sometimes 3 generations, all sharing the same sleeping space. Picture 10 people sprawled across straw mattresses, wool blankets patched and heavy, the air thick with smoke and breathing. You might complain about the lack of elbow room, but you wouldn't dare sleep apart. Sleeping alone was dangerous. The cold could sap your strength before morning. In some villages, widows or orphans were taken in during the winter, folded into other households at night, because no one should face the frost by themselves. Of course, sleeping together wasn't just about warmth, it was about safety. In the deep silence of a medieval night, strange noises drifted through the village, the howl of wolves, the creak of trees under snow, the distant crack of ice. Having bodies around you, hearing their breathing, reminded you that you weren't alone. That reassurance helped push away both the chill and the fears that haunted the dark. But let's be real, sleeping in one big heap came with problems. Children kicked in their sleep, adults snored like trumpets, and don't forget the lice. Once one family member had them, everybody had them. Nighttime scratching was practically a lullaby. You laugh grimly to yourself, because in this world, the phrase "good night's sleep" is just a fairy tale. Still, you find small comforts. You adjust the blanket, tucking it under your chin, and the combined warmth of your family begins to seep into you. Your dog shifts, sighing heavily, his body heat radiating through the wool. For a few moments, you forget the smoke, the fleas, the draft. All you feel is the weight of survival pressing in close, heavy but reassuring. There's an odd intimacy to this closeness. You know the rhythm of each family member's breathing, the way they shift when they dream, the little murmurs that rise in the night. The hut may be drafty, the bed scratchy, but the warmth of bodies is steady, reliable, and free. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval villages, people actually rotated sleeping positions during the night. Not for fairness, but because those on the edges of the pile grew colder, faster. By shifting around, everyone had a turn in the warmer middle. It sounds chaotic, but when survival depends on a few degrees of warmth, even midnight shuffling makes sense. Historians still debate how common this was across Europe, but the principle remains the same. Survival meant sharing. Heat, food, chores, space, all of it. No one hoarded warmth. In fact, to sleep apart from your family in winter would be considered strange, even suspicious. Togetherness wasn't optional, it was instinct. As you drift towards sleep, you realize that the human body is your most valuable heater, more dependable than firewood, cheaper than wool, safer than sparks. You may itch, sneeze, and grumble at the constant elbows in your ribs, but when the frost creeps down from the rafters, it's your family's warmth that keeps your heart beating until dawn. The wind rattles the shutters again, and you burrow deeper into the pile, grateful. Survival in winter isn't about comfort, it's about clinging close, breathing together, and waking up alive when the first gray light of morning slips through the cracks. The warmth of your family heap lingers, but eventually morning comes. And with it the reminder that you can't just wear the same cloak all winter and expect to survive. You drag yourself upright, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and glance at the pile of clothes hanging from wooden pegs near the wall. They aren't fancy, nothing a lord would glance at twice but for you. Every layer is armor in the war against cold. Wool is your best friend, scratchy, heavy, and smelling faintly of sheep, even after countless washings. Or more honestly, Countless seasons of not washing's the material that keeps you alive. Your tunic is homespun, rough against the skin, but you pull it over your head anyway. Over that, you shrug on another tunic, a cloak fastened with a simple pin, and maybe an extra patchwork shawl if you can spare it. You don't care about style. You care about not freezing. Hose cover your legs, stitched from wool as well, though with more holes than fabric at this point. You've patched them so often, the stitches themselves are like embroidery, accidental patterns of survival. Over your feet, rough leather shoes, or boots, stuffed with straw when you need more insulation. It works better than you'd expect, though you have to replace the straw often unless you enjoy soggy, moldy insoles. Dressing in layers is key. Medieval peasants didn't have winter coats in the modern sense, so they relied on piling fabric until they resembled lumpy cabbages. Linen undergarments, if you owned enough, trapped a little warmth. Wool tunics stacked on wool tunics trapped more. Cloaks, hoods, mittens all patched, frayed, and smelling like smoke formed the outer defenses. You don't dress to impress. You dress to survive the next 6 months. The irony. Wool is heavy when wet, and medieval winters weren't just cold, they were damp. Rain, snow, sleet, all conspiring to soak your layers and drag them down around your ankles. A soggy cloak doesn't just smell like a wet sheep, it chills you to the bone. So you try to keep dry, huddling under awnings, wrapping cloaks tighter, or patching with oiled cloth when you can afford it. Historians still argue how widely oiled or waxed fabrics were used among peasants. But you know any trick, however rare, is worth copying if it keeps your tunic from turning into an icicle. You run your hands over the cloak draped across your shoulders. It's been with you for years, mended more times than you can count. Each patch tells a story, this one from last winter's frost crack, that one from a spark off the hearth. Clothes aren't disposable. They're heirlooms. A cloak might get passed from parent to child, growing thinner with every season, but still precious, when cloth is handmade. Every thread matters. There's a practical joke hidden in the clothing too. Peasants weren't as drab as popular imagination suggests. Sure, bright dyes were expensive, but muted colors, yellows, browns, greens were achievable with natural dyes, like onion skins or nettles. So you might trudge through the snow in a cloak that looks like moss, or a tunic faintly tinged with saffron. Not because you wanted to make a fashion statement, but because that's what the dye vat produced. Imagine a whole family bundled in mismatched earth-toned patchwork, looking like a walking quilt. Not exactly Paris runway, but practical enough. Pulling on your hood, you glance at your neighbor, stepping out of his hut. He's wrapped like you, layers upon layers, his breath puffing white in the morning air. You both look like shapeless bundles of fabric, waddling more than walking, but that's the point. Nobody cares about elegance in the dead of winter. They care about who still has enough layers to keep the frostbite away. The most treasured item of all, mittens or gloves. Your fingers are your lifeline for farm chores, fetching water, or stirring stew, and if they freeze, you're in trouble. Some people wore wool mittens, others wrapped scraps of cloth around their hands. Even leather scraps tied with string would do. Anything was better than bare skin against icy air. You've heard tales of fingers lost to frostbite, stiff and black before spring. Whether exaggerated or not, the warning keeps you tugging your mittens tight each morning. The straw rustles beneath you as you shift, pulling the blanket tighter, and you realize something obvious. Even with your scratchy mattress and smoky hearth, the real secret to surviving a medieval winter night isn't the fire or the bedding, it's the bodies beside you. You glance around your hut. Everyone is crammed in like spoons in a drawer. Your partner's elbow digs into your ribs. One child is sprawled half across your chest. Another clings to your leg like it's a pillow. And the dog has somehow claimed the warmest spot near your feet. Cozy, not exactly. Effective. Absolutely. Medieval families knew instinctively what modern science later confirmed. Shared body heat works like magic. One person wrapped in a cloak loses warmth quickly, but 5 people crammed under the same wool blanket. That's a furnace powered by human breath and skin. The cold drafts sneaking through the walls don't stand a chance against a pile of snoring peasants. This was standard practice. Families slept in groups, not out of sentimentality, but out of necessity. Beds were expensive to build, blankets even more so, and warmth was a resource best conserved together. Historians still argue whether this arrangement strengthened family bonds or just made everyone crankier in the morning, but you don't have time to debate, you're too busy fighting for blanket real estate against a determined 5-year-old. Animals, too, joined the pile. Chickens tucked themselves on rafters, cats padded silently around the straw, and pigs sometimes plopped right down on the dirt near the fire. In harsh winters, even larger animals, calves or goats, might be allowed inside. Their warmth was priceless, and their bodies acted like furry radiators. The downside? You also got barnyard smells, muddy hooves, and the occasional surprise on the floor by morning. But again, comfort ranked far below survival. You cough lightly into the smoky air. The fire's still glowing, but the chill presses in from the edges of the room. You shift closer to your partner, who mumbles something incoherent in her sleep. The children nestle tighter, their breath warm against your skin. There's no privacy, no quiet space, but as the night deepens, you understand that this heap of family and livestock is your strongest shield against the bitter cold. Imagine the scene in a larger hut. Grandparents, parents, children, cousins, sometimes 3 generations, all sharing the same sleeping space. Picture 10 people, sprawled across straw mattresses, wool blankets patched and heavy, the air thick with smoke and breathing. You might complain about the lack of elbow room, but you wouldn't dare sleep apart. Sleeping alone was dangerous. The cold could sap your strength before morning. In some villages, widows or orphans were taken in during the winter, folded into other households at night, because no one should face the frost by themselves. Of course, sleeping together wasn't just about warmth, it was about safety. In the deep silence of a medieval night, strange noises drifted through the village. The howl of wolves, the creak of trees under snow, the distant crack of ice. Having bodies around you, hearing their breathing, reminded you that you weren't alone. That reassurance helped push away both the chill and the fears that haunted the dark. But let's be real, sleeping in one big heap came with problems. Children kicked in their sleep. Adults snored like trumpets. And don't forget the lice. Once one family member had them, everybody had them. Nighttime scratching was practically a lullaby. You laugh grimly to yourself, because in this world, the phrase "good night's sleep" is just a fairy tale. Still, you find small comforts. You adjust the blanket, tucking it under your chin, and the combined warmth of your family begins to seep into you. Your dog shifts, sighing heavily, his body heat radiating through the wool. For a few moments, you forget the smoke, the fleas, the draft. All you feel is the weight of survival pressing in close, heavy but reassuring. There's an odd intimacy to this closeness. You know the rhythm of each family member's breathing, the way they shift when they dream, the little murmurs that rise in the night. The hut may be drafty, the bed scratchy, but the warmth of bodies is steady, reliable, and free. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval villages, people actually rotated sleeping positions during the night. Not for fairness, but because those on the edges of the pile grew colder faster. By shifting around, everyone had a turn in the warmer middle. It sounds chaotic, but when survival depends on a few degrees of warmth, even midnight shuffling makes sense. Historians still debate how common this was across Europe, but the principle remains the same. Survival meant sharing. Heat, food, chores, space, all of it. No one hoarded warmth. In fact, to sleep apart from your family in winter would be considered strange, even suspicious. Togetherness wasn't optional, was instinct. As you drift toward sleep, you realize that the human body is your most valuable heater. More dependable than firewood, cheaper than wool, safer than sparks. You may itch, sneeze, and grumble at the constant elbows in your ribs, but when the frost creeps down from the rafters, it's your family's warmth that keeps your heart beating until dawn. The wind rattles the shutters again, and you burrow deeper into the pile, grateful. Survival in winter isn't about comfort, it's about clinging close, breathing together, and waking up alive when the first gray light of morning slips through the cracks. Asterisk, the warmth of your family heap lingers, but eventually morning comes, and with it the reminder that you can't just wear the same cloak all winter and expect to survive. You drag yourself upright, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and glance at the pile of clothes hanging from wooden pegs near the wall. They aren't fancy, nothing a lord would glance at twice but for you. Every layer is armor in the war against cold. Wool is your best friend, scratchy, heavy, and smelling faintly of sheep, even after countless washings, or more honestly, countless seasons of not washing. It's the material that keeps you alive. Your tunic is homespun, rough against the skin, but you pull it over your head anyway. Over that, you shrug on another tunic, a cloak fastened with a simple pin, and maybe an extra patchwork shawl if you can spare it. You don't care about style. You care about not freezing. Hose cover your legs, stitched from wool as well, though with more holes than fabric at this point. You've patched them so often the stitches themselves are like embroidery, accidental patterns of survival. Over your feet, rough leather shoes or boots, stuffed with straw when you need more insulation. It works better than you'd expect, though you have to replace the straw often unless you enjoy soggy, moldy insoles. Dressing in layers is key. Medieval peasants didn't have winter coats in the modern sense, so they relied on piling fabric until they resembled lumpy cabbages. Linen undergarments, if you owned enough, trapped a little warmth. Wool tunics stacked on wool tunics trapped more. Cloaks, hoods, mittens, all patched, frayed, and smelling like smoke, formed the outer defenses. You don't dress to impress. You dress to survive the next 6 months. The irony. Wool is heavy when wet, and medieval winters weren't just cold, they were damp. Rain, snow, sleet, all conspiring to soak your layers and drag them down around your ankles. A soggy cloak doesn't just smell like a wet sheep, it chills you to the bone. So you try to keep dry, huddling under awnings, wrapping cloaks tighter, or patching with oiled cloth when you can afford it. Historians still argue how widely oiled or waxed fabrics were used among peasants, but you know any trick, however rare, is worth copying if it keeps your tunic from turning into an icicle. You run your hands over the cloak draped across your shoulders. It's been with you for years, mended more times than you can count. Each patch tells a story, this one from last winter's frost crack, that one from a spark off the hearth. Clothes aren't disposable. They're heirlooms. A cloak might get passed from parent to child, growing thinner with every season but still precious. When cloth is handmade, every thread matters. There's a practical joke hidden in the clothing too. Peasants weren't as drab as popular imagination suggests. Sure, bright dyes were expensive, but muted colors, yellows, browns, greens were achievable with natural dyes, like onion skins or nettles. So you might trudge through the snow in a cloak that looks like moss, or a tunic faintly tinged with saffron. Not because you wanted to make a fashion statement, but because that's what the dye vat produced. Imagine a whole family bundled in mismatched earth-toned patchwork, looking like a walking quilt. Not exactly Paris runway, but practical enough. Pulling on your hood, you glance at your neighbor, stepping out of his hut. He's wrapped like you, layers upon layers, his breath puffing white in the morning air. You both look like shapeless bundles of fabric, waddling more than walking, but that's the point. Nobody cares about elegance in the dead of winter. They care about who still has enough layers to keep the frostbite away. The most treasured item of all, mittens or gloves. Your fingers are your lifeline for farm chores, fetching water, or stirring stew, and if they freeze, you're in trouble. Some people wore wool mittens, others wrapped scraps of cloth around their hands. Even leather scraps tied with string would do. Anything was better than bare skin against icy air. You've heard tales of fingers lost to frostbite, stiff and black before spring. Whether exaggerated or not, the warning keeps you tugging your mittens tight each morning. Inside the hut again, you strip back a layer and sit by the fire. You feel clumsy, weighed down by fabric, but you're grateful. Each thread is another barrier between you and the cold that presses in from outside. The children laugh as they wrestle into their own little tunics, arms poking through too short sleeves. Clothing is often handed down until it falls apart, so your youngest wears hose patched from 3 siblings before him. It doesn't fit, but it's warm, and that's enough. There's also the smell. Don't picture fresh laundry with lavender sachet. Washing wool in winter is a nightmare. Cold water stiffens the fabric, and drying takes days, especially in damp huts. So yes, your cloak smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and sheep. It's unpleasant, but that smoky layer doubles as deodorizer, masking the worst of it. Kind of. Maybe. You chuckle softly, remembering a story you once heard at the alehouse. A traveling merchant mocking villagers for smelling like wet dogs. Someone shouted back, "Better wet dogs than frozen corpses." That shut him up quickly. Sometimes you think humor is as much a survival tool as wool. Historians still debate whether peasants dressed significantly differently from one region to another. But one thing is certain, wool was universal, and layering was life. It didn't matter if you were in England, France, or the German states. If you were poor, you bundled yourself like a cabbage and hoped for the best. As the night falls again, you shed only a few layers before crawling back into the straw bed. You keep most of your clothing on. Stripping down to nothing, as you might in a modern heated bedroom, would be madness. You sleep in your tunic, your hose, maybe even your cloak. Clothes are blankets, and the fewer layers you take off, the warmer you'll stay until morning. The fire flickers low, smoke curling against the rafters, and you tug the hood tighter around your head. The straw pricks at your legs, a child's foot digs into your ribs, but under the layers, you feel cocooned, almost secure. You may smell like a damp barnyard and itch from fleas, but you're alive, and your wool-wrapped body is winning another round in the endless fight against winter. Asterisk, you're drifting in and out of sleep, half dozing as the embers glow faintly in the hearth. Then you hear its soft shuffling in the straw. Not your children, not your spouse, something heavier. You roll over, and sure enough, there's the family pig rooting around near the wall. You groan, but don't kick it out. In fact, you're glad it's there. That pig is another warm body in your crowded hut. And in the middle of a medieval winter night, warmth is worth more than peace and quiet. Sharing your home with animals isn't unusual, it's survival. You and your family aren't the only ones who need shelter. Chickens roost on beams above your head, clucking softly in their sleep. A cow, if you're fortunate enough to own one, huffs warm breath into the dark, its bulk radiating heat like a living stove. Goats and sheep curl together near the corner, their earthy smell blending with smoke and sweat. If you think it sounds chaotic, you're right. Your home is less a cozy cottage and more a barn with beds shoved in the corner. But that's the point. The animals' bodies raise the inside temperature just enough to keep frost from creeping over everything. Historians still argue about how common it was for peasants to keep animals indoors versus in separate sheds. Some records suggest it varied widely, depending on wealth, climate, and building design. But in the harsher climates, there's little doubt that bundling beasts and humans under one roof was a very real practice. You don't need academic debate to confirm it too can smell the truth all around you. It isn't glamorous. Chickens poop wherever they please, and stepping barefoot into something squishy in the dark is a nightly gamble. A restless cow might kick, and if you're unlucky, you could wake to a goat trying to nibble your cloak. But the heat is undeniable. On the coldest nights, your breath fogs less indoors, and you can thank your four-legged companions for that. Think of it like a medieval heating system, livestock edition. In modern times, you'd shiver by a thermostat, waiting for the furnace to kick in. In your world, you listen to the steady chewing of cud and feel the body heat of your animals, turning your hut into a barely thawed sanctuary. If the family pig wants to snore loudly in your straw bed, you let it. Better a noisy pig than frostbitten toes. There's a quirky saying passed around in whispers. Better to sleep with a cow than alone with the cold. You chuckle at it, though you're not sure if it's meant as wisdom or as a joke. Either way, it rings true. Sometimes, you even bury your chilled feet into the warm flank of a dog curled at the edge of the bed. Dogs aren't just guardians in medieval life, they're portable heaters too, of course. Sharing your hut with animals means living in a constant haze of smells. Manure, damp hay, smoke from the hearth, the sour temps of sweat, all mingling into a perfume that could knock a courtly noble off his high horse. But you're used to it. You don't smell filth. You smell survival. And besides, you'd rather put up with stink than freeze in a clean but empty hut. One of the fringe tales floating through the village warns of a woman who refused to let her animals indoors. She thought herself better than barn livers, scoffing at neighbors who shared beds with goats. That winter, her family nearly froze. By spring, she was so humbled she let her chickens roost right above her hearth. Whether the tale is true or not, it gets told again and again. A cautionary bedtime story with manure-stained morals. It's not just warmth that makes animals essential. They're alarms too. A dog barking in the night alerts you to intruders or wolves circling the village. A restless horse stamping in the corner might warn of a thief creeping near. And chickens, they'll announce dawn whether you're ready or not. There's a strange comfort in this symphony of animal sounds as you try to fall asleep. The soft clucking, the lowing of cows, the rhythmic crunch of hay. It's like your own off-key lullaby, blending with the crackle of dying embers. You almost forget that just outside your thin wooden door, the wind howls across empty fields, sharp enough to cut through bone. And when the morning comes, those same animals pull you back to life. Their warmth may have kept you alive through the night, but their needs drag you out of bed at dawn. You have to feed them, water them, milk them, muck after them. Winter doesn't let you rest. Your survival and theirs are chained together, for better or worse. You look at the pig rooting in the corner again. Tomorrow, or next month, it might be dinner. But tonight, it's your bedfellow, your heater, your oddly comforting roommate. The duality of medieval life hits you love, and rely on the same creatures you eventually eat. It's grimly practical, but you can't afford sentimentality when survival hangs on every choice. Some nights, when the fire burns too low, and frost creeps along the inside of the walls, you inch closer to the animals. You feel their heat radiate, smell the sweet sour musk of their bodies, and drift into sleep, grateful for the crude, barnyard warmth. You imagine how nobles in their stone castles boast of roaring fires, fur blankets, and feather beds. Let them brag. You've got your pig's chicken pecking survival system right here, and it works well enough. You close your eyes, letting the strange orchestra of barnyard noises blend into your dreams. Your hut may look like chaos to an outsider, but inside, it's a living furnace, noisy, smelly, crowded, but undeniably warm. Asterisk, you wake with a start as the wind whistles against the walls, a low moan that makes the shutters rattle like old teeth. It's the middle of the night, and for a moment you wonder if the whole hut might blow apart. You pull the wool cloak tighter, shifting in the straw, and glance toward the door. A thin line of moonlight slices through a crack, spilling silver on the floor. That's the trouble. You're not only fighting cold air, you're fighting the endless ways it sneaks in. Your home is built from timber and waterland daub sticks woven together in plastered with mud and dung. It's sturdy enough to stand against storms, but no one would call it airtight. Gaps between boards let in drafts that creep along the floor like icy fingers. A strong gust can push through, extinguishing a candle and leaving you in darkness. The fight against the cold isn't just about cloaks and fires. It's about sealing up every hole and crack that wants to turn your hut into a wind tunnel. The simplest defenses are shutters. Not glass windows, those belong to wealthy lords and monasteries, but wooden boards you swing closed at dusk, hinged roughly, with iron if you're lucky, or leather strips if you're not. They slam shut against the night. Some people tack oiled cloth or parchment over them. Thin barriers that keep out the worst drafts while still letting in a ghost of daylight. It's not elegant, but when the winter gales scream, you'll take anything that stops the air from slicing across your face as you sleep. Even so, air finds a way in. So you stuff cracks with hay, rags, moss, or even handfuls of dung mixed with straw. Yes, it smells earthy. Yes, it falls apart by spring. But in winter, plugging gaps with whatever material you can find is a matter of survival. You crouch low, pushing tufts of straw into crevices near the floorboards, your fingers numb from the cold. If you didn't, the draft would chill your ankles all night, making it impossible to sleep. Asterisk. There's a running joke in your village that medieval peasants invented the world's first insulation. Contractors. Only the payment wasn't gold, it was ale. A neighbor might barter for help sealing his hut, trading a clay jug of weak beer for 2 hours of straw-stuffing labor. You laugh about it at the alehouse, but you know deep down, it's no joke. A badly sealed house could mean frostbite, sickness, or worse. Historians still argue about how much peasants cared about indoor comfort. Some think you were too busy working to fuss over drafts, while others suggest entire families spent hours shoring up huts before the worst of the cold hit. From your perspective, the answer is obvious. You care enough to survive. You may not line walls with carved paneling or fur, but you'll ram moss into every crack until your fingers bleed if it means your children stop shivering. Doors are another weak spot. Your hut's entrance is a single plank of wood, bound together with nails or rawhide, hung crookedly on hinges that groan whenever it moves. No luck's just a simple latch. The gap beneath the door is wide enough for mice to scurry through, and more importantly, wide enough for the wind to snake in. So you lay down whatever you can, a roll of straw, an old cloak, even bundles of twigs to wedge against it. Anything to keep the draft from cutting across the room like a frozen dagger. Inside, you sometimes drape cloths along the walls, like makeshift tapestries. Wealthy households used rich fabrics to decorate, but you settle for rough linen, or even old sacks. They don't just look homely. They stop the wind from whistling through wattle and daub, a second skin for the hut, flimsy but effective enough. When you lie in bed and hear the storm outside, those cloth hangings flutter softly, proof that the barriers are working. Of course, nothing is perfect. On the coldest nights, frost creeps along the inside of the walls anyway, sparkling in the firelight like cruel decorations. You wake to see your breath hanging in the air, a pale cloud above your head. Even though the shutters are barred and the cracks stuffed, you sigh, tug the covers tighter, and remind yourself, at least it isn't as bad as outside. There's an odd little superstition tied to shutters in some villages. People say, leaving them open at night invites not only cold, but spirits, wandering souls carried on the wind. Whether you believe it or not, you never risk it. You always close them before dusk, sliding the latch and muttering a small prayer, just in case. After all, you already hear enough strange noises at night without wondering if you've let in ghosts. Quirky detail. Some families even used animal hides as insulation. A stretched sheepskin nailed across a wall might block a draft, and if you're lucky, it doubles as decoration. It's a luxury for you. But when your neighbor hangs one up, you can't help but eye it with a mix of admiration and jealousy. Nothing says I'm surviving winter better than you. Like a fur-lined hut, you pull the shutter tight again and test the latch. Outside, the wind rattles, but inside, it only shudders the walls. You feel safer, cocooned in your patched-up shelter. Sure, smoke stings your eyes, straw pokes at your feet, and the hut smells like a barnyard. But with the shutters closed and the cracks sealed, the icy night stays just far enough away. Before crawling back into bed, you crouch near the door and run your hand along the bundle of straw wedged beneath it. The draft is weaker now, just a faint whisper. Good enough. You smile faintly, thinking of how your grandchildren might one day complain about winter too, even if by then they've built stronger houses. Cold, after all, is eternal. You can only fight it with whatever weapons your age gives you: straw, cloth, dung, and stubbornness. And when you finally lie down again, the wind still howling outside, you can't help but chuckle. Nobles may brag about stone keeps with thick walls, but you have something they don't: ingenuity born of necessity. Who else would think to shove sheep's wool into a crack or hang old sacks as curtains? It's not pretty, but it's clever. And in the end, cleverness keeps you alive. The shutters creak, but hold. The door shivers, but stays shut, and as you drift back to sleep, you realize the cold hasn't won tonight. You have ... The wind finally eases by dawn, leaving your hut creaking but intact. You sit up shivering, and know immediately what you need most: something warm in your stomach. Fire gives heat to the body, but food is what keeps that warmth burning long after the flames die down. And so, much of your winter survival depends not only on cloaks and shutters, but on the steaming bowls of ale-soaked porridge, thick stews, and whatever scraps you can scrape together. You shuffle to the hearth, where last night's embers glow faintly. You blow gently, poke the ash with a stick, and watch sparks bloom into life again. Fire is stubborn. Like you, it refuses to die if there's still a hint of fuel left. Once the flames lick upward, you set a blackened iron pot over it, fill it with water, and start stirring in the makings of breakfast. Most mornings it's pottage, the peasant's faithful companion. Imagine porridge, but with fewer rules. A base of grains, barley, oats, or whatever's on hand boiled into mush, then thickened with beans, peas, or cabbage. If you're lucky, maybe a shred of pork bone for flavor, or a few herbs dried from summer. You eat it day after day until you barely taste it anymore. But you're grateful because it fills the belly and warms the core. You ladle out a portion into a rough wooden bowl. Steam rises, curling around your face. The first bite scalds your tongue, but you don't care. It feels like the warmth sinks right into your chest. You've heard people joke that peasants are basically half porridge by body weight in winter. They're not wrong. Alongside the pottage sits ale, weak but nourishing. It's not the strong stuff you imagine, nights guzzling, but small ale, brewed light enough to drink daily. It's safer than water, which often teems with illness, and it carries a gentle warmth. A clay cup of it chases the chill away, leaving you a little flushed, a little more ready to face the day. Even children drink it, their small mugs clinking against yours in the dim light. Historians still argue over just how weak the brew was, but you know it's less about drunkenness and more about comfort or liquid blanket to wrap around your insides. For dinner, when night comes, howling again, the stew pot bubbles with whatever the day offered. Root vegetables, onions, and turnips are staples, reliable, long-lasting, and humble. On rare evenings, you drop in a piece of salted fish, or even a rabbit, if someone managed to snare one. The broth grows rich, filling the hut with a smell that makes every stomach growl. You ladle out bowls, laughing at how it always tastes faintly like last week's stewbie. 'Cause in truth, it's the same pot, refilled, replenished, never truly emptied. Medieval peasants don't waste food. They stretch it until spring. Still, you're not without treats. A hunk of cheese, tough and salty, makes its way to the table once in a while. Bread, dense, and coarse, with bits of bran and grit, is dipped into broth to soften it. Sometimes, you nibble dried apples or berries, shriveled from summer's harvest, but still sweet on the tongue. It's not much, but in the bleak even a single bite of preserved fruit feels like sunshine. You joke with your children as you eat, pretending the cabbage in the stew is actually roast goose, or that the watery ale is liquid fire stolen from a dragon. Laughter, you discover, adds flavor when the food itself is plain. One quirky tidbit about your diet: people say onions are almost magical. They cure coughs, ward off evil, and keep you warm, or so the village healer swears. So you slice them into stews, chew them raw, and even tuck them into pockets like charms. Whether it works or not, the smell alone might scare away both spirits and nosy neighbors. At night, food becomes part of your survival ritual. After sealing shutters and piling into straw beds, you take comfort in knowing your belly is lined with something warm. Hunger is cruel in winter. It makes the cold feel sharper, the draughts more biting. But with stew in your stomach and ale on your lips, you settle into bed with a little more peace. Historians still debate how monotonous peasant diets truly were. Some argue you had little variation, living mostly on gruel. Others suggest clever use of herbs, wild greens, and foraged nuts brought more diversity than we assume. From your lived perspective, it's somewhere in between. You might not feast like a noble, but you're no stranger to creativity. You'll flavor pottage with nettles in spring, throw in garlic in autumn, and stretch every scrap into something vaguely different from yesterday's. Survival breeds inventiveness in the kitchen as much as on the farm. The fire pops, sending a spark across the hearth. You sip the last of your ale, licking foam from your mustache, and sigh in satisfaction. Maybe your stew isn't a banquet, but it warms you better than furs and blankets alone. The truth is, food in winter isn't just about calories, it's about hope. Every spoonful is a reminder that you made it one more day, that your stores are holding out, that spring is somewhere ahead. As you curl back beneath the covers, the taste of onions still lingering, you chuckle softly. Who knew survival could taste like mush and smell like cabbage? Yet here you are, alive, full, and almost comfortable. For a medieval peasant, that's a victory feast. The stew has settled in your belly, the ale left a faint warmth in your chest, and the hut has gone quiet except for the soft crackle of the hearth. But winter nights aren't pitch black without help. You glance around and realize just how precious the small circle of light around you truly is. Without it, the room would be a cave. The corners alive with shadows and your imagination whispering all sorts of nonsense about what might be lurking there. So you reach for one of your simplest treasures, a rushlight. It doesn't look like much: a dried reed, or rush dipped in animal fat, propped in a clamp. But when you strike flint and steel and finally coax the flame to catch, it glows weakly, casting a thin golden beam. It doesn't burn long, maybe half an hour, but in that short time it does something magical. It turns the freezing, drafty hut into a place where you can still cook, mend clothes, or simply stare at the glow and forget the cold. Candles are better, of course, but tallow candles, made from animal fat, smoke terribly and leave a smell that clings to everything. Wax candles, pure, bright, sweet-smelling, are treasures of the church or the wealthy. You've probably only seen them in passing, glowing like tiny suns in the chapel. You'd never waste money on such luxuries when your children need shoes or your pig needs feed. So rushlights it is, cheap, quick, and smoky. You prop a rushlight near the hearth, and its flicker joins the fire's glow. The shadows retreat, just enough to let you see your children's faces as they huddle under blankets. The light catches the straw of the bed, making it gleam like dull gold. You don't realize how much you rely on this little flame until it sputters low, and panic flutters in your chest, because once the light dies, you'll be alone with the darkness. Darkness isn't just inconvenient in the medieval world. It's terrifying. Without light, you can't see the embers to stoke them. You can't find your mittens or your cloak. And you can't tell if that scratching sound in the corner is a rat or something worse. The night feels alive, filled with spirits, thieves, or wolves prowling just beyond the thin walls. Light is your shield, your fragile comfort. It's funny though, you still use light sparingly. Tallow is costly, rushes require collecting and dipping, and firewood has to be rationed. So you time your evenings carefully. A rushlight for mending a tunic, then out. The fire burning low, but not high enough to waste precious logs. You learn to accept the dark, to sleep early, to let the long nights pass with dreams rather than fighting them. Modern folk might call it boring. For you, it's just life. There's a quirky little practice you sometimes hear about burning dried fish as light. The oil seeps out as it smolders, creating a crude lamp. It smells atrocious, but in a pinch, people swear by it. You haven't tried it yourself. But you can imagine the children laughing at the idea of a fish head candle dripping onto the hearth. Dinner and light in one, you'd joke, though no one would eat that fish afterward. Historians still argue whether peasants kept their homes as dark as possible, or whether they regularly used multiple light sources. Some records suggest only one candle for a whole house, used sparingly. Others hint at wider use of rushlights or oil lamps, especially in wealthier villages. From your perspective, it depends on the season, the harvest, and how much fat you could spare. Some winters you live in gloom. Others, you have just enough to keep a tiny flame burning most nights. You glance at the flicker again and smile. The rushlight bends, guttering as the fat burns away. The children's eyes are heavy, reflecting the firelight. For them, this faint glow is all they've ever known. No torches, no lanterns, no steady beams of modern electricity. Just the fragile comfort of a reed dipped in fat. Enough to make the night less endless. Sometimes, during festivals or special occasions, you splurge. You light multiple rushes, or even a tallow candle, and the room seems transformed. The shadows leap back. The hut feels bigger, warmer, even joyful. The family laughs louder. The songs carry further, and for one night the cold doesn't feel quite so heavy. That's the magic of light. It changes, not just what you see, but how you feel. When the rushlight finally sputters out, you sit in the glow of the fire alone. The corners are black again, the hut smaller, the air colder, but the memory of the flame lingers. You know you'll dip another reed tomorrow. You'll ration the fat. You'll do whatever it takes to keep a little glow alive through winter. Without it, you'd feel swallowed by the night. You lean back, listening to the crackle of the embers, and chuckle softly. Nobles may boast of golden chandeliers and wax candles burning all night. But you know the secret joy of a single rushlight. It's frail beam enough to make the darkness less frightening. It's a reminder. Even the smallest flame can feel like the sun in the middle of a medieval winter. And so, wrapped in your cloak, you drift toward sleep again, comforted by the memory of light. Asterisk, the fire is low, the rushlight gone, and you've just started to drift when a soft shuffle pulls you awake. At first you think it's the pig again, but then you hear the creak of the door. Your heart jumps. It's nothing, probably the wind. But what if it isn't? You prop yourself up, listening. The hut is never truly silent. There's always the murmur of breath, the shifting of straw, the distant cry of the wind outside. But this sound is different. It carries the weight of a choice. Do you get up and check, or hope it's only the draft? That's the reality of winter nights. You can't just seal yourself in and forget the world. Someone always keeps watch, whether to guard the fire, to listen for wolves, or to make sure no thief slips into the village while everyone sleeps. In summer, danger is bad enough. In winter, it feels sharper, more immediate. A fire that dies overnight might leave your family frozen. A thief who steals your salted pork might starve you before spring. Even a sudden gust through a poorly latched door could undo all your careful sealing. So you get up, grumbling, pulling your cloak tight around your shoulders. The air bites instantly, sharper than a blade. You shuffle to the hearth, crouch, and poke the embers. They glow faintly, but are fading. You toss on a few twigs, blow carefully, and watch them spring back into flame. Relief washes over you. The fire is alive again. Without it, the night would be unbearable. Keeping the fire going is an art in itself. You can't waste wood, it's precious, and chopping in snow is misery, so you learn tricks. Banking the fire under ash to smolder slowly, feeding it just enough to survive until morning, and teaching even your children how to poke it back to life if it falters. You've heard of families who let their fire die and had to beg embers from neighbors, trudging through snow with a clay pot in hand. Some villages even kept communal fires burning, tended by a watchman, so no home ever risked total darkness. You glance at the door next. It's still latched, though the wind tugs at it. The shuffle you heard might have been the pig after all. Still, you know the stories of wolves that prowl at the edge of villages, drawn by the scent of livestock. You've never seen one up close, but the elders swear they used to watch glowing eyes blink from the tree line. True or not, the idea alone is enough to keep you vigilant. Then there are thieves. Winter makes desperate men bolder. If someone runs out of grain or salted meat, hunger drives them to risk everything. A chicken stolen in December is one less meal in February. So you, like many peasants, sleep lightly, always half aware of the door, the fire, and the faint noises outside. Historians still argue whether medieval villages organized formal night watches, or whether each family simply fended for itself. In towns, it's more likely you've heard of watchmen with horns, patrolling the streets. In villages like yours, it feels more personal. Each family guards their hut, and neighbors trust one another to shout if trouble stirs. There's a strange comfort in that, even if it means your rest is never truly deep. As you settle back down, you think about the chores that fill these endless nights. You mend clothes by firelight, stirring the pot occasionally to keep the stew from sticking. You scrape frost from tools left too close to the walls. You even check on the animals, making sure the cow hasn't toppled a water bucket or the chickens haven't frozen. It's exhausting, but in its own way. It's what gets you through winter, the rhythm of small, necessary tasks. Sometimes, though, the watch becomes more than routine. You remember a story told at the alehouse about a man who fell asleep on his watch, only to wake and find his pig gone. He claimed wolves took it, but the whispers suggest his neighbor's stew smelled suspiciously porky the next day. Whether true or not, the tale carries its warning. Never trust the night, and never let your guard down. One quirky trick you've seen is villagers hanging iron charms by the door. Supposedly, the metal keeps away both thieves and spirits. You're not sure, you believe it, but you hung an old horseshoe anyway, just in case. If nothing else, it catches the moonlight and reassures you when you glance up during your rounds. As the night drags on, you poke the fire one last time, pulling a blanket tighter around your shoulders. You think about how nobles in their castles might have guards patrolling with torches, roaring hearths in every hall, servants to stoke fires through the night, and you smirk. Let them have their luxuries. You have your own system. One eye open, one hand near the fire, and ears tuned to every creak and shuffle. It works, and that's enough. Asterisk. You crawl back into the straw bed, your body aching but calmer now. The children murmur in their sleep. The pig snorts softly in the corner, and the cow shifts, sending a ripple of warmth through the air. The fire glows steady again, painting the rafters with orange. You've held the night at bay, Don. As you finally drift off, you smile faintly. In this harsh world, survival isn't just about strength or courage. Sometimes, it's about the quiet victories, the fire that didn't die, the door that held shut, the thief who passed by because your watchful eyes caught the shuffle in the dark. Asterisk the fire sighs. The pig rustles in its sleep, and outside the wind howls like a hungry spirit. You tug your cloak closer and remind yourself that winter nights aren't just about huddling in silence, they're also about finding ways to pass the hours until the first thin ribbon of dawn appears. You don't have dice or shiny board games from the future, but that doesn't mean you sit like lumps on a straw mattress, staring into the dark. You and your family invent your own rhythms of survival, part necessity, part entertainment, part sanity-preserving ritual. The most important tool in your winter arsenal isn't an axe or a shovel, it's your mouth. Stories are the fire of the mind, and they burn bright when wood is scarce. After supper, once the children are drowsy, but not yet asleep, you spin tales. Some are practical, like fables warning them not to wander too far into the forest. Others are legends, half believed, half feared. You tell of saints who battled devils in icy caves, of spirits that creep through cracks in the walls, of ancestors who wrestled storms with only faith and a rusty spear. You may not have books, those belong to priests and scribes, but you have memory. And in a world where written words are rare, oral memory is treasure. It's not all gloom and firelight fear, though. Jokes slip in, too. You tease your eldest about snoring louder than the ox. You mock yourself for tripping over the pig in the dark, acting it out until the little ones giggle. Humor is as necessary as warmth. Without it, the weight of endless nights would smother you. There's also singing. Your voice isn't trained, but that hardly matters. Folk songs are simple, looping, built to echo in rafters, and soothe fidgeting children. You sing work songs in slower rhythm, almost lullabies, verses about plowing fields, brewing ale, or carrying wood. Sometimes the whole family joins in, their voices weaving together until the hut vibrates with sound. It makes the walls feel less thin, the winter less endless. Historians still argue whether peasants treated winter evenings mostly as sleep-filled downtime or whether communal gatherings stretched the hours with song and storytelling. Some accounts suggest 2 sleeps, people dozing early, waking at midnight to talk or pray, then sleeping again until dawn. Others believe families stayed awake longer together, filling the dark with shared sound. Either way, you know the truth in your bones. You don't simply lie there for 12 frozen hours. You carve the night into chunks of survival. And then there are the games. You don't have polished chessboards like nobles, but you scratch grids into the hearth ash and play with pebbles. A version of drafts, perhaps, or something like 9 Men's Maurice, learned from travelers who passed through. Sometimes you toss bones as dice, betting chores instead of coins. The children squeal when they win, knowing it means they can avoid mucking out the pigsty tomorrow. It's all simple, but it passes time. And time passing is half the battle in winter. One quirky pastime you've tried is shadow puppets. You hold your hand near the rushlight and wiggle your fingers, making crude shapes on the wall. The children shriek when you pretend it's a wolf creeping toward them, then laugh when it turns into a duck. It's silly, yes, but it feels like magic, creating stories from nothing but light and imagination. Of course, not all winter night activities are playful. You use the hours to mend. Clothes fray, shoes wear thin, and tools crack. By firelight, you stitch with bone needles, patching tunics again and again until they resemble quilts more than garments. The children complain about itchy seams, but you remind them that itchy seams are better than frostbitten skin. The wives in the village sometimes boast about who can spin the tightest thread or weave the warmest cloth. You take pride in your own rough repairs, knowing each stitch is one less reason for your family to shiver. And then there are prayers. Religion threads through the night like a second fire. Before bed, you mutter, thanks for the day's survival, and beg protection for the long, dark hours ahead. The children kneel beside you, whispering half-understood Latin phrases they picked up from church. You're not always sure if heaven listens, but the ritual itself is steadying. Like banking the hearth, Occasionally you visit neighbors during long nights, though that's risky in deep winter. Still, when the snow isn't too cruel, families gather in a single hut, pooling firewood and stories. Those nights feel almost festive. You huddle close, sharing cider, if someone's lucky enough to have brewed it, and laugh louder, because the darkness feels less heavy when shared. The children fall asleep, tangled together in straw piles, and the adults keep talking until the rushlight gutters. It's funny how the mind adapts. At first, the idea of a 12-hour night terrifies you. You imagine endless boredom, gnawing hunger, and creeping dread. But soon, you learn to see the night as its own world, a space for things daylight never allows: weaving, teaching, singing, mending, even dreaming aloud about better harvests or miraculous finds. The dark becomes a canvas, and every small act of imagination paints it with color. You remember one winter when an old traveler stayed with your family, bringing news of distant towns. He taught the children riddles, like puzzles about foxes and geese crossing rivers. They sat wide-eyed, whispering guesses long after he'd gone to sleep. That winter, instead of dreading the night, they begged for it because darkness meant riddles, laughter, and the spark of ideas bigger than their small world. Of course, fatigue eventually wins. No matter how many games you play or tales you tell, your body craves rest. You slip into the strange rhythm of segmented sleep, drifting off for a few hours, waking in the middle night, then dozing again until dawn. The time between sleeps is often when the richest conversations happen. Secrets spill, dreams are shared, even quarrels are mended. You almost prefer those hours, when the fire is low, and the world feels like it belongs only to you, and whoever is awake beside you. So here you are now. The rushlight long dead, the fire glowing faintly. The children snore softly, the pig shifts in its corner, and your spouse mutters something incoherent in their sleep. You smile. The night has given you laughter, stories, shadows, and silence all in one. And though dawn is still hours away, you no longer dread the wait. You've learned how to fill it with firelight, with memory, with the fragile but stubborn warmth of being human together. Asterisk, you stir awake sometime in the middle of the night, not because of noise or danger this time, but because your feet are blocks of ice. No amount of twisting and shoving them under your spouse or tucking them in the straw has worked. Winter nights are merciless, and keeping warm is a constant chess match you against the cold. And the cold always seems to make the first move. So what do? You curl tighter, of course, but peasants like you have more tricks than just shivering. Layering is your first line of defense. You don't own a closet bursting with outfits, but you pile on every scrap you can. Wool tunic, patched cloak, worn leggings, mittens, stitched from old sheepskin. The layers don't look elegant, but who cares? Function trumps fashion. You'd rather resemble a bundle of laundry than wake up frostbitten. Bedding is another weapon. Your straw mattress is scratchy and full of the occasional unwelcome flea, but it insulates better than bare ground. On top, you spread whatever blankets you can manage, usually rough wool. Sometimes, if luck shines, you add a sheepskin or even an old fur. The weight of it all presses you down like a millstone, but you tell yourself it's comforting, like being hugged by a particularly smelly bear. But the real warmth, the best warmth, comes from people. Families sleep close, tangled together in a mound of limbs, cloaks, and snores. You wedge your children between you, not just for their comfort, but for your own. The shared heat builds, turning the straw bed into a living furnace. Sure, someone always elbows you in the ribs, and the pig rooting nearby doesn't help the smell. But when the frost creeps down the rafters, you're grateful for every extra body. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly piled in one bed or kept some separation for dignity. The truth is probably both. Some families had multiple straw pallets, especially if the hut was large enough. Others packed in like sardines because it was the only way to survive. Privacy takes a back seat to survival when the alternative is freezing. And you, lying here with your children's feet kicking your shins? Know which choice you'd rather make. There are other quirkier tricks you've seen too. Some families heat stones in the fire, then wrap them in cloth and tuck them at the foot of the bed. Others fill ceramic jugs with hot water, makeshift versions of the modern hot water bottle. The warmth fades quickly, but it's heavenly while it lasts. On especially bitter nights, you've even seen folk bring chickens into bed. Yes, chickens, because every feather counts when the frost bites. You chuckle at the thought of nobles, wrapped in silks and furs, complaining about drafts in their stone chambers. Let them shiver with their tapestries. You know the real secrets: pig warmth, children's snores, and the art of stuffing straw until your bedding feels like a fortress. Still, sometimes nothing works. The cold seeps in through every crack, numbs your fingers, stiffens your toes. On those nights, you don't sleep much. You huddle, rock gently, and whisper prayers for dawn. You remember your neighbor's tale of a man who drank too much ale, passed out in the snow, and never woke again. That memory alone keeps you cautious, never straying too far from the fire, never letting yourself drift too deeply when the frost feels unusually cruel. And yet, in the middle of this shivering misery, there's comfort. You're not alone. You share the night with others who understand the same struggle. When the rooster finally crows and the frost still rims the window slats, you'll joke with your neighbors about whose nose froze first, or who woke with straw stuck in their hair. Humor is as much a blanket as wool. The cold also teaches you resilience. You adapt in ways you never imagined. You learn how to breathe shallow, so icy air doesn't stab your lungs. You figure out how to tuck your hands under your knees to preserve warmth. You accept that comfort is relative if your toes only feel like dull rocks instead of knives. You call it a win. One fringe tidbit you once heard at market made you laugh. Some swore by rubbing goose fat on the skin before bed to seal in the warmth. You've never tried it. Two don't fancy smelling like a roasting goose all night, but maybe, just maybe, there's wisdom in it. People have always invented strange rituals when the cold presses too hard. The funny thing, the longer you endure these winters, the more you realize the cold is as much mental as physical. Yes, it numbs your bones, but it also forces you to slow down, to share space, to value the simplest comforts. A patched blanket feels like treasure, a mug of hot broth like gold. The cold teaches gratitude in its grumpy, icy way. So you lie there now, straw rustling beneath you, your children breathing slow beside you, the fire's glow barely kissing the rafters. The frost might be creeping in, but so is warmth, the stubborn warmth of family, the silly warmth of pigs and chickens, the layered warmth of wool and prayer. You may never escape the cold entirely, but you survive it, and sometimes, in the hush of the long night, that feels like victory enough. Asterisk, your nose stings from the chill, but your stomach grumbles louder than the wind. Winter warmth is only half the struggle, full bellies are the other. Surviving the long nights isn't just about huddling under wool and straw. It's about what you put in your body to fuel the fight against cold. And in the medieval countryside, your options are limited, predictable, and let's be honest, more than a little repetitive. You roll over and think about what's waiting in the larder. The stew you made earlier still clings to the sides of the pot, thick with barley, cabbage, and maybe a scrap of salted pork if you were lucky that day. That's the peasant's winter staple, endless pottage. You toss whatever you have into the pot: onions, beans, turnips, dried peas, and let it simmer until it becomes one bubbling cauldron of "please don't let us starve." Day after day, it changes slightly, depending on what scraps are added, but it never disappears. People joke that a pottage could be older than the children eating it, since you just keep topping it up, rather than starting fresh. Bread is the other cornerstone. Though bread might be a generous word, your loaves are coarse, dark, and dense. made with rye, barley, or oats, rather than fine white wheat, which is reserved for nobles and the church. They're filling, though sometimes so tough you could use them as doorstops. In fact, sometimes you do trenchers of stale bread serve as plates, soaking up stew before being eaten or tossed to the pigs. Nothing goes to waste when survival is at stake. Then there's ale. Weak ale, brewed at home, barely stronger than water, but much safer to drink. Water from streams is risky, especially in winter when animals foul it. So you brew ale from barley or oats, letting it bubble just enough to kill the worst of what lurks inside. Even children drink it. The warmth spreads, not enough to make you drunk, unless you're greedy, but enough to trick your body into feeling cozy for a while. Historians still argue whether peasants had steady access to meat in winter, or whether it was mostly a rare treat. You know the reality. If you're careful, you can salt and smoke pork, or maybe share in the annual village pig-killing feast before Christmas. For a few weeks, you taste fat and savor every bite. After that, meat is rare, reserved for festivals or emergencies. Dried fish appears sometimes, traded from coastal folk, though it smells so strong your children pinch their noses. Still, you eat it gratefully. Hunger is the best seasoning, after all. One quirky tradition is brewing broth from bones long after the meat is gone. You boil them for hours, coaxing out every drop of fat and flavor, thickening it with barley to make something hearty. You joke that peasants could make a single cow last 3 winters if given enough pots and patience, and maybe that's not far off the truth. As you sip your stew or gnaw on dark bread, you think about how nobles feast in their halls. Roast swan, pies filled with venison, spices from across the seas. You shake your head. Let them choke on cinnamon. They wouldn't last a week on your diet. And yet, you can't help but wonder how honeyed pastries might taste after months of cabbage and barley. Probably like heaven. Food isn't just fuel, though. It's survival insurance. In autumn, you spent endless days salting pork, drying beans, hanging onions from rafters, burying turnips in cellars. Every morsel hoarded is a night survived, and every time you dip your ladle into the pottage, you silently calculate how long until the stores run low. The fear of hunger hangs heavier than frost. Sometimes you turn to truly desperate measures. Acorns, boiled and leached of bitterness, bark ground into flour, even nettles, dried and crushed, stirred into porridge. Folk remedies for famine, whispered like curses. You pray it won't come to that this winter, but you've heard stories of villages where it did, and those stories keep you diligent, guarding your stores like treasure. There are little joys though. Honeycomb stolen from bees in summer, saved in clay jars, opened on a feast day when morale droops. A jug of cider passed hand to hand as the fire roars. Chestnuts roasted until they split, eaten hot, making the hut smell like warmth itself. Small luxuries, reminders that winter isn't only hardship, and you never forget the social side of food. A neighbor shares a ladle of richer stew when your stores look lean. You give a hunk of bread in return. At feasts, holy days, mostly you eat together, laugh together, and pretend, just for an evening, that hunger isn't a wolf stalking the edge of every village. You glance at your children now, curled under the blankets, their bellies full enough to sleep. That's the quiet victory of every winter night. They're not crying from hunger. The stew holds, the bread lasts, the ale warms, and you keep going. The wind rattles the shutters. But inside the hut, the faint smell of barley and onions lingers, wrapping you in a comfort greater than any fur. Tomorrow, you'll eat the same again, and the day after, and maybe the month after. But as long as there's something in the pot, you'll endure. So you roll over, sighing, and let your stomach rest. Survival may be bland, but it's survival all the same. Asterisk, asterisk, your belly may be full enough for now, but the night stretches long, and sleep doesn't always come easy. It isn't only the cold that keeps you restless sometimes. It's the strange, half-dreaming silence of winter itself. The mind wanders in the dark, and before you know it, your hut becomes a stage for thoughts, fears, and superstitions that creep closer than any wolf. You shift under the heavy blankets, listening. Every crack of the timbers, every shuffle from the animals, makes your ears twitch. Rationally, you know it's nothing what expands in the cold. Pigs root in their straw, but reason doesn't always win at midnight. People talk of spirits slipping through cracks in the door, of witches who ride the wind, of ghosts that tap on shutters, looking for warmth. And while you may laugh at those stories by daylight, at night you find yourself muttering a quick prayer, just in case. One of the most common fears is the night air itself. Folk call it miasma, believing sickness drifts invisibly through the dark like mist. That's why you keep shutters closed tight, even if it means more smoke in the hut. Better to choke a little than let the night breath seep in. Historians still argue whether peasants truly feared night air, or whether later scholars exaggerated it. But either way, you treat the night as something alive, something dangerous. Dreams add to the mystery. You wake sometimes, sweating, heart pounding, after visions of wolves at the door or fields covered in ice. Your neighbor once swore he dreamed of a cow giving birth to a calf with 2 heads and, a week later, his wife miscarried. Coincidence, perhaps, but dreams are never taken lightly. They're warnings, messages, or omens, and you carry them like pebbles in your shoe. You chuckle at the thought of nobles, wrapped in silks and furs, complaining about drafts in their stone chambers. Let them shiver with their tapestries. You know the real secrets: pig warmth, children's snores, and the art of stuffing straw until your bedding feels like a fortress. Still, sometimes nothing works. The cold seeps in through every crack, numbs your fingers, stiffens your toes. On those nights, you don't sleep much. You huddle, rock gently, and whisper prayers for dawn. You remember your neighbor's tale of a man who drank too much ale, passed out in the snow, and never woke again. That memory alone keeps you cautious, never straying too far from the fire, never letting yourself drift too deeply when the frost feels unusually cruel. And yet, in the middle of this shivering misery, there's comfort. You're not alone. You share the night with others who understand the same struggle. When the rooster finally crows and the frost still rims the window slats, you'll joke with your neighbors about whose nose froze first, or who woke with straw stuck in their hair. Humor is as much a blanket as wool. The cold also teaches you resilience. You adapt in ways you never imagined. You learn how to breathe shallow, so icy air doesn't stab your lungs. You figure out how to tuck your hands under your knees to preserve warmth. You accept that comfort is relative if your toes only feel like dull rocks instead of knives. You call it a win. One fringe tidbit you once heard at market made you laugh. Some swore by rubbing goose fat on the skin before bed to seal in the warmth. You've never tried it. Two don't fancy smelling like a roasting goose all night, but maybe, just maybe, there's wisdom in it. People have always invented strange rituals when the cold presses too hard. The funny thing, the longer you endure these winters, the more you realize the cold is as much mental as physical. Yes, it numbs your bones, but it also forces you to slow down, to share space, to value the simplest comforts. A patched blanket feels like treasure, a mug of hot broth like gold. The cold teaches gratitude in its grumpy, icy way. So you lie there now, straw rustling beneath you, your children breathing slow beside you, the fire's glow barely kissing the rafters. The frost might be creeping in, but so is warmth, the stubborn warmth of family, the silly warmth of pigs and chickens, the layered warmth of wool and prayer. You may never escape the cold entirely, but you survive it, and sometimes, in the hush of the long night, that feels like victory enough. Asterisk, your nose stings from the chill, but your stomach grumbles louder than the wind. Winter warmth is only half the struggle, full bellies are the other. Surviving the long nights isn't just about huddling under wool and straw. It's about what you put in your body to fuel the fight against cold. And in the medieval countryside, your options are limited, predictable, and let's be honest, more than a little repetitive. You roll over and think about what's waiting in the larder. The stew you made earlier still clings to the sides of the pot, thick with barley, cabbage, and maybe a scrap of salted pork if you were lucky that day. That's the peasant's winter staple, endless pottage. You toss whatever you have into the pot: onions, beans, turnips, dried peas, and let it simmer until it becomes one bubbling cauldron of "please don't let us starve." Day after day. It changes slightly, depending on what scraps are added, but it never disappears. People joke that a pottage could be older than the children eating it, since you just keep topping it up rather than starting fresh. Bread is the other cornerstone. Though bread might be a generous word, your loaves are coarse, dark, and dense, made with rye, barley, or oats rather than fine white wheat, which is reserved for nobles and the church. They're filling, though sometimes so tough you could use them as doorstops. In fact, sometimes you do trenchers of stale bread serve as plates, soaking up stew before being eaten or tossed to the pigs. Nothing goes to waste when survival is at stake. Then there's ale. Weak ale, brewed at home, barely stronger than water, but much safer to drink. Water from streams is risky, especially in winter when animals foul it. So you brew ale from barley or oats, letting it bubble just enough to kill the worst of what lurks inside. Even children drink it. The warmth spreads, not enough to make you drunk, unless you're greedy, but enough to trick your body into feeling cozy for a while. Historians still argue whether peasants had steady access to meat in winter, or whether it was mostly a rare treat. You know the reality. If you're careful, you can salt and smoke pork, or maybe share in the annual village pig-killing feast before Christmas. For a few weeks, you taste fat and savor every bite. After that, meat is rare, reserved for festivals or emergencies. Dried fish appears sometimes, traded from coastal folk, though it smells so strong your children pinch their noses. Still, you eat it gratefully. Hunger is the best seasoning, after all. One quirky tradition is brewing broth from bones long after the meat is gone. You boil them for hours, coaxing out every drop of fat and flavor, thickening it with barley to make something hearty. You joke that peasants could make a single cow last 3 winters if given enough pots and patience, and maybe that's not far off the truth. As you sip your stew or gnaw on dark bread, you think about how nobles feast in their halls. Roast swan, pies filled with venison, spices from across the seas. You shake your head. Let them choke on cinnamon. They wouldn't last a week on your diet. And yet, you can't help but wonder how honeyed pastries might taste after months of cabbage and barley. Probably like heaven. Food isn't just fuel, though. It's survival insurance. In autumn, you spent endless days salting pork, drying beans, hanging onions from rafters, burying turnips in cellars. Every morsel hoarded is a night survived, and every time you dip your ladle into the pottage, you silently calculate how long until the stores run low. The fear of hunger hangs heavier than frost. Sometimes you turn to truly desperate measures. Acorns, boiled and leached of bitterness, bark ground into flour, even nettles, dried and crushed, stirred into porridge. Folk remedies for famine, whispered like curses. You pray it won't come to that this winter, but you've heard stories of villages where it did, and those stories keep you diligent, guarding your stores like treasure. There are little joys though. Honeycomb stolen from bees in summer, saved in clay jars, opened on a feast day when morale droops. A jug of cider passed hand to hand as the fire roars. Chestnuts roasted until they split, eaten hot, making the hut smell like warmth itself. Small luxuries, reminders that winter isn't only hardship, and you never forget the social side of food. A neighbor shares a ladle of richer stew when your stores look lean. You give a hunk of bread in return. At feasts, holy days, mostly you eat together, laugh together, and pretend, just for an evening. That hunger isn't a wolf stalking the edge of every village. You glance at your children now, curled under the blankets, their bellies full enough to sleep. That's the quiet victory of every winter night. They're not crying from hunger. The stew holds, the bread lasts, the ale warms, and you keep going. The wind rattles the shutters, but inside the hut, the faint smell of barley and onions lingers, wrapping you in a comfort greater than any fur. Tomorrow, you'll eat the same again, and the day after, and maybe the month after. But as long as there's something in the pot, you'll endure. So you roll over, sighing, and let your stomach rest. Survival may be bland, but it's survival all the same. Asterisk, your belly may be full enough for now, but the night stretches long, and sleep doesn't always come easy. It isn't only the cold that keeps you restless sometimes, it's the strange, half-dreaming silence of winter itself. The mind wanders in the dark, and before you know it, your hut becomes a stage for thoughts, fears, and superstitions that creep closer than any wolf. You shift under the heavy blankets, listening. Every crack of the timbers, every shuffle from the animals, makes your ears twitch. Rationally, you know it's nothing what expands in the cold. Pigs root in their straw, but reason doesn't always win at midnight. People talk of spirits slipping through cracks in the door, of witches who ride the wind, of ghosts that tap on shutters, looking for warmth. And while you may laugh at those stories by daylight, at night you find yourself muttering a quick prayer, just in case. One of the most common fears is the night air itself. Folk call it miasma, believing sickness drifts invisibly through the dark like mist. That's why you keep shutters closed tight, even if it means more smoke in the hut. Better to choke a little than let the night breath seep in. Historians still argue whether peasants truly feared night air, or whether later scholars exaggerated it. But either way, you treat the night as something alive, something dangerous. Dreams add to the mystery. You wake sometimes, sweating, heart pounding, after visions of wolves at the door or fields covered in ice. Your neighbor once swore he dreamed of a cow giving birth to a calf with 2 heads, and, a week later, his wife miscarried. Coincidence, perhaps, but dreams are never taken lightly. They're warnings, messages, or omens, and you carry them like pebbles in your shoe. Superstitions bloom in the dark like mushrooms. You hang charms by the door, an iron nail, a sprig of rowan, believing they ward off evil. You whisper a blessing before bed, tracing a cross over the children's foreheads. Even little things matter. You don't sweep after dark, for fear of brushing good fortune out the door. You don't whistle indoors at night, because who knows what spirits might think it's a call. Then there are the stories of witches. Old women with crooked backs, muttering herbs into cauldrons, blamed for milk souring or calves dying. You don't fully believe it, but you can't shake the unease when your candle flickers oddly, or when a chicken stops laying without reason. Sometimes, when the snow piles high and tempers fray, whispers circle. Maybe she cursed us. Fear feeds on darkness as surely as fire feeds on wood. Of course, not every belief is dark. Some are protective, even comforting. You might set out a crust of bread near the hearth, an offering for wandering spirits, so they pass your family by. Or you mark a chalk cross above the door at Epiphany, believing it guards the house for the year. These little acts give you control, or at least the feeling of it, against forces too big to fight directly. One quirky tradition you've seen is placing a knife under the bed, blade outward, to cut nightmares away. Your cousin swears by it, and while you're skeptical, you once slipped a rusty dagger beneath your straw, just to test it. That night, you slept soundly. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the cold isn't the only thing to respect during winter. Nights, Historians still argue whether medieval peasants genuinely believed in demons and witches everywhere, or whether much of that folklore came from church propaganda. You don't care who's right. You live in a hut where the wind sounds like howling. Shadows dance on the rafters, and sickness can steal a child overnight. In that world, it makes sense to believe in more than what you can see, and sometimes, superstition carries unexpected warmth. You remember your grandmother telling you that every star on a clear winter night was a soul keeping watch. When you step outside to fetch water and see the sky glittering, it comforts you to think you're not truly alone. Even in the silence, someone watches. You tuck yourself deeper into the straw, your mind half between sleep and waking. You're aware of the fire's last glow, the weight of blankets, the steady breathing of your family. But behind it all, you sense the weight of centuries of belief, whispering through every creak and gust. You can't prove spirits exist, but you feel them, just as you feel the cold pressing through the walls. And in that strange twilight between waking and dreaming, you accept the truth. Winter nights are as much battles of the mind as of the body. If a charm, a prayer, or a silly knife under the bed helps you rest, then who's to say it isn't real enough? You exhale, long and slow, watching your breath curl white in the air. The hut may be small, the cold may be biting, but you've built yourself a fortress not just of straw and wood, but of stories, rituals, and belief. And sometimes, that's the strongest fortress of all. Asterisk, asterisk, the embers glow faintly. Your belly is calm, and the children snore like tiny sawmills. For a moment you think you might finally drift into steady sleep, but then scratch, scratch. The sound jerks you wide awake. Not the door this time, not the pig either. No, this is a sharper, greedier sound, and you already know what it is. Rats. If winter is hard on peasants, it's paradise for vermin. Grain, cheese, dried beans, salted pork, everything you've hoarded for survival is exactly what the rats dream about. You listen as the scratching grows bolder, then hear the telltale scuttle across the rafters. A shiver runs down your spine, not from the cold this time, but from the thought of sharp teeth tearing into the one thing you can't afford to lose. You rise carefully, pulling your cloak tight, and creep toward the larder corner. By firelight you glimpse a beady-eyed shadow darting across the floor. You mutter a curse, grab a stick, and smack the straw pile. The rat vanishes into some unseen gap, as if laughing at you. Tomorrow you'll reset the trap's simple wooden bars, sometimes weighted stones, even crude buckets half filled with water. Anything too thin their numbers. But tonight, you know they'll return. They always do. Historians still argue whether rats were as common inside peasant homes as they were in towns. Some claim village huts, with animals already living inside, were too chaotic to notice a few more critters. Others argue rats thrived anywhere humans stored grain. From your perspective, there's no argument at all. You've seen them with your own eyes, gnawing holes in sacks, bold as kings when the hearth dies low. And it isn't just rats. Mice, fleas, and lice keep you company too. You scratch your scalp absently, feeling the crawl that never quite disappears. Flea bites sting your ankles where the straw doesn't cover. You can burn bedding or boil clothes, but vermin always come back, like bad jokes from your neighbor. You've resigned yourself to it. A night without itching is as rare as a feast of roast venison. There are stranger intruders too. Spiders weaving in rafters, beetles clicking on the hearthstones, the occasional bat that blunders down the chimney. Once, a toad hopped across your floor in midwinter, warmed by the fire, until the children squealed in delight. Your spouse muttered that it was a bad omen, but you secretly found it charming. Better a toad than another rat. Quirky remedies exist, of course. Some villagers swear by hanging dried mint or tansy to repel rodents. Others scatter ashes around food stores, believing rats dislike the texture. You've even heard of cats kept in monasteries just for pest control. Though in your village, a good mouser is rare and prized. If you had one, you'd treat it like nobility warm straw, first pick of the milk, maybe even a spot by the fire. Until then, it's you against the rats. You remember a story told at the alehouse of a man who claimed to see glowing eyes in the rafters at midnight. He swore it wasn't rats, but demons come to steal grain. Maybe it was just ale talking, but in winter nights, when scratching sounds echo louder than your heartbeat, you can almost believe it. Hunger makes men see monsters where there are only vermin. Or maybe hunger makes monsters real. The real danger, of course, is disease. You don't know the word bacteria, but you know families who sickened after a winter of too many bites, too much filth. Children waste away, fevers burn, and whispers spread of curses or divine punishment. Historians later argue about whether it was plague or typhus or something else entirely. But you know only the raw truth. Vermin steal more than food. They steal lives. Yet, even in this, humor survives. Your children giggle when you tell them rats are just extra winter guests who forgot to bring ale. You joke about charging them rent in turnips. Laughter doesn't keep rats away, but it makes the fear sting less. And that's half the battle on nights like this. You poke the fire, watching sparks leap, and glance toward the food stores again. For now, they're safe. Tomorrow you'll patch holes, reset traps, and pray for a cat to wander by the village. Tonight, you'll endure, as always. The scratching resumes faintly, but you pull the blanket tighter and force yourself to close your eyes. Survival isn't about erasing every threat. It's about living alongside them, finding balance between vigilance and rest. You'll never rid the hut entirely of rats, fleas, or crawling things, but you'll outlast them, season after season, because your will to keep your children fed is fiercer than their hunger. And as you drift again into uneasy sleep, you smirk to yourself. Let the vermin try. Tomorrow, you'll still be here, with stew in the pot, bread on the table, and a stick ready for any beady-eyed visitor foolish enough to squeak in your presence. Asterisk, you wake before the rooster crows, not because you're eager, but because your toes have gone stiff with cold again. The fire has sulked down to the faintest breath of warmth, and the hut hangs heavy with night frost. You curl tighter, but there's no avoiding it. Winter mornings demand action, no matter how much your body begs to stay wrapped like a turnip in straw. The first task is simple in theory, and miserable in practice: fetching water. The bucket from last night sits solid, its surface locked under a lid of ice. You crack it with a stick, scoop what you can, and sigh. It won't last, which means you'll have to go out to the well. The thought alone makes you groan. Pulling on stiff boots and a rough wool cloak, you brace yourself for the blast of cold waiting beyond the door. It's the kind that steals your breath instantly, the kind that makes your eyelashes stick together. The snow squeaks underfoot as you trudge toward the well, the world still drowned in darkness. Stars glitter above, so sharp they feel like they could cut you. When you reach the well, you mutter a small prayer it isn't frozen solid. Sometimes, villagers must hack through ice with axes just to reach water, a chore that leaves hands raw and spirits broken. Tonight, fortune smiles. You lower the bucket, hear the splash, and heave it back up, arms shaking with the weight. Water sloshes over the rim, instantly turning your fingers numb. You cradle it like treasure, because that's exactly what it is. Historians still argue whether medieval wells were always accessible in the dead of winter, or if peasants relied more on stored rainwater and melted snow. You don't care for the debate. You know the truth in your bones. Water is life, and every winter morning begins with the battle to get it. Back in the hut, you set the bucket near the hearth and rub your hands furiously. They sting as the blood returns, pins and needles biting harder than any rat. Your spouse stirs and pulls the children closer, still dozing in their nest of blankets. You envy them for a heartbeat before turning to the next chore: rekindling the fire. You kneel at the hearth, uncovering the buried embers, whispering encouragement as if they're stubborn children. A puff of straw, a careful breath, and suddenly there, a glow leaps brighter, a lick of flame climbing upward. You feel giddy, almost triumphant, as though you've won a duel. Fire is back, and with it, the promise of warmth and boiled porridge. Breakfast is no feast. You scoop oats into the pot, add water, maybe a pinch of salt, if fortune allows. The smell is plain but comforting, steam curling like ghostly fingers through the hut. The children rub their eyes awake, noses red, hair wild. They hover close, waiting for bowls as though porridge is cake from a king's table. Hunger does that. It turns the ordinary into miracle. Quirky customs sprout even here. Some villagers drop a coal into the first pot of the day, believing it wards off illness. Others cross themselves before stirring, not wanting to anger household spirits. You don't mind the rituals. They make the porridge taste a little richer, if only in the mind. After breakfast comes the morning stretch of chores, a parade of tasks designed to keep frost from swallowing the household whole. You break ice on the animals' troughs, scattering handfuls of straw to keep hooves from freezing. You check that the cow's teats haven't cracked in the cold. Rub ointment if needed, and murmur to her as your hands draw milk into a pail. The steam rising from her body makes the barn smell earthy, alive, a stark contrast to the dead silence outside. Back inside, the children gather scraps of wood or dried dung to fuel the day's fire. You repair a torn shoe, patch a blanket, sharpen tools dulled by frost. Every movement feels slower in the cold, but every chore is urgent. If you don't do them, tomorrow will be harder. In winter, laziness isn't a sin, it's a death wish. Historians still argue how much work medieval peasants managed on the short days of winter. Whether they rested more or simply shifted tasks indoors, you know only that rest rarely comes. Even when fields lie barren, the fight for survival is endless. The work just changes shape, from sowing to mending, from harvesting to scraping frost off the inside of your shutters. And through it all, there's the morning silence. Unlike summer mornings, alive with birdsong and bustle, winter dawn breaks like a secret. The village is hushed, smoke rising lazily from chimneys, each family moving in their own slow rhythm. The only sounds are the crunch of snow, the thud of an axe splitting wood, the cough of someone unlucky enough to have caught a chill. Despite the hardship, mornings carry their own kind of hope. Each one you survive feels like proof you can outlast the season. You sip hot milk, feel warmth seep back into your fingers, and watch light slowly creep across the horizon. For a brief moment, you let yourself imagine spring muddy paths, green shoots, and days where water doesn't turn solid overnight. It feels impossibly far, but also inevitable. Just as dawn follows night, spring follows winter. You grin despite yourself, joking in your head. Only 3 more months of frozen misery to go. The sarcasm helps. If you can laugh at the cold, even a little, you've stolen power from it. So you stoke the fire higher, lift the bucket of fresh water, and call to the children. Another day in winter begins. And though it looks the same as yesterday, you know each sunrise is a victory, a reminder that, for all the biting frost and aching bones, you're still here. Asterisk, asterisk, by the time the sun finally drags itself above the horizon. The world outside glitters, like it's been dipped in glass. The snow crunches like broken pottery underfoot. The trees stand stiff with frost, and your breath rises in clouds thick enough to hide behind. Morning chores may be done, but winter doesn't pause just because you've eaten a bowl of porridge. The day stretches ahead, and it demands energy you're not sure you have. Midday in winter is a strange creature. The sun sits low, never warming more than your face if you stand in its path. Shadows stay long, even at noon, and every gust of wind feels like a thief, snatching heat from your bones. Still, you work. You chop firewood until your arms ache, stack it carefully near the hut, and pray you've cut enough to last through the week. The pile looks impressive now, but you know how quickly it shrinks when the cold presses harder. Some days you mend, tools resharpening a scythe that won't be used until spring, or patching the wooden handles of hoes and rakes. It feels strange, tending to things that won't see soil for months, but it keeps your hands busy and your mind sharp. Historians still argue whether peasants saw winter as a time of rest, or whether it was just a different kind of labor. From where you stand, there's no rest at all, only shifting battles. Animals, of course, keep you busiest. The cow lowing for more hay, the chickens needing thawed water, the pigs snuffling impatiently. They're as restless as you are, pacing in their stalls, waiting for signs of green that won't come until April. You envy their simplicity. Sleep, stay warm. No superstitions about witches or omens troubling their minds. Then again, when the pig squeals at shadows, you can't help but glance over your shoulder to Dot. By midday, hunger gnaws again. The porridge is long gone, so you ladle out thin broth from yesterday's pot, maybe thicken it with bread crusts. The children complain, it's the same as breakfast, but you hush them with a wink. Tomorrow, it'll taste new again. They roll their eyes, but they eat, because hunger doesn't wait for variety. Sometimes, midday offers small blessings. A neighbor might stop by, bringing gossip like a gift. You hear about someone's cow calving early, or about a tree falling on a shed. You trade your own scraps of news, the exchange as warming as soup. It's in these small visits that you remember you're not struggling alone. The village breathes together, each family bound by the same frost, the same hope for survival. Other times you pass the midday hours with crafts, spinning wool into coarse yarn, weaving baskets from brittle willow branches, carving small wooden toys for the children. These tasks may seem simple, but they're lifelines. A new basket means food can be stored longer. A warm cloak spun today may save a child's life in February. Even the toys matter. They keep spirits alive when daylight fades too quickly. Quirky traditions creep into midday too. Some villagers say you must never spin wool on a Sunday, lest the thread tangle all week. Others believe sharpening tools on certain feast days offends saints. You follow the rules when you can, though secretly you think the saints have better things to do than watch your scythe. Still, better safe than sorry. It's hard enough surviving without divine irritation. The hours crawl, marked by the rhythm of breath and chores. You find yourself daydreaming more often than in summer, your mind slipping to warmer memories. You imagine the taste of fresh apples, the sound of bees in fields, the feeling of soil crumbling in your hands. The children dream too, whispering about summer fairs, or the return of traveling merchants. Their voices lift the heavy silence, and you smile even as your fingers stay numb. Historians still argue how much leisure medieval peasants truly had. Some say afternoons allowed moments of storytelling, or even games, while others insist every hour was consumed by work. The truth likely sits between. You snatch small pockets of ease when you cantilling riddles to the children while mending a boot, humming a tune while stirring broth. It's not leisure in the modern sense, but it keeps despair from taking root. The sun begins to dip before you're ready, painting the snow with streaks of pale gold. Shadows stretch even longer, and the air grows sharper. You gather the children close, herding them back inside like sheep before wolves. The day feels too short, too fleeting, as though winter itself steals time. By the time you set the last log on the fire and close the shutter tight, darkness is already pressing at the walls again. You sit down, weary to the marrow, and let yourself feel a tiny spark of pride. You made it through another day. The well didn't freeze, the animals are fed, the fire still burns. It's not triumph in the way kings might know it, but for a peasant in winter, it's everything. You smirk to yourself, whispering a joke only you can hear. If the saints are keeping score, I'd like at least half a point for today. Then you stretch your stiff fingers toward the fire, watching sparks leap, and prepare to face the long night once more. Night falls again, as it always does in winter, swift and heavy, like a curtain dropped over the stage. The sky turns violet, then black, and soon the hut is swallowed in silence, broken only by the occasional crack of timber or the soft murmur of animals shifting in their straw. You settle back onto your bed, the warmth of the fire brushing your face, the weight of the day pressing down on your shoulders. The routine has become second nature now. Check the animals one last time. Stir the embers, tuck the children beneath blankets, and whisper a quick prayer that no mischief, natural or supernatural, slips through the cracks tonight. It feels as though you've lived this same evening 100 times already, and in truth, you have. Winter nights stretch long and endless, and memory blurs until they feel like one continuous vigil against cold, hunger, and fear. But tonight, as you lie there listening to the familiar chorus, the lowing cow, the popping fire, the occasional snore, you allow yourself to think bigger. Survival isn't just about this single night, or even this single winter. It's about weaving yourself into the endless chain of lives that came before and will come after. Every choice you make, whether to rise for water at dawn, whether to patch a torn boot, whether to share a scrap of bread with a hungry neighbor, pulls outward. Historians still argue how much peasants thought beyond the day-to-day struggle, whether you saw yourselves as trapped by circumstance or part of a larger story. But lying here now, you know it's both. You feel trapped, yes, by frost and hunger, yet also bound to something vast and enduring. Just as your ancestors huddled under skins by firelight, you endure now, and your children will remember your stubbornness long after the snow has melted. You recall the old saying whispered by elders: winter either breaks you, or it forges you. Looking at your children curled up like puppies, you hope for the latter. Perhaps they'll carry your strength forward, weaving it into their own stories. Perhaps, years from now, they'll tell their children how you all survived the coldest season by clinging to each other, by laughing at hardship, by refusing to let the fire die. And maybe that's the secret of winter survival, not just bread or firewood, but memory, story, and humor. You've teased the children with rat jokes, rolled your eyes at superstitions, and muttered sarcastic prayers about rent. These moments, silly as they seem, are weapons too. They blunt the sharp edge of fear, making the unbearable bearable. The fire sighs low again, and you cover the embers with ash, trusting them to endure until dawn. You tuck the blankets tighter, listening as the wind prowls outside, rattling the shutters, but finding no way in. Your hut may be small, drafty, and crowded with animals, but it is fortress enough within its smoky walls. You've built a life stubborn enough to withstand even the cruelest nights. You exhale slowly, letting tension drain from your shoulders. Tomorrow will bring the same chores, the same icy walk to the well, the same patching of tools, the same endless cycle of feeding, mending, and hoping. But for now, you've done enough. For now, you rest, knowing survival is never about conquering the season in one grand gesture, but about repeating these small, steady victories until spring finally arrives. And so, with your family safe beside you, your animals snuggled in the barn, and your fire sleeping quietly beneath its ash blanket, you allow your own eyes to close. The long night stretches ahead, but you face it with calm. You've learned how to bend without breaking, how to cling without despair, how to find light even in deepest dark. You whisper one last joke into the quiet. If winter wants to wrestle, it'll have to wait until morning. Then, at last, you let sleep take you. And now, as the fire in our little story dims and fades, so too does the noise of the world around you. Imagine that hut, once more the straw bed soft beneath you, the weight of blankets cocooning your body, and the gentle hush of snow falling outside. The air inside is warm enough now, safe enough, that you can let your muscles loosen and your mind drift. Each sound softens, the cow shifting in her stall, the embers sighing beneath their ash, the faint rustle of children's breathing in the dark. They blur together into a single, soothing rhythm, like a lullaby hummed by the earth itself. The fears of the night, the scratching of vermin, the whisper of superstitions, the bitter sting of frost recede into the distance. They are just echoes, fading farther and farther away, until only calm remains. Picture the slow stretch of winter nights, not as a threat, but as an invitation, a chance to rest, to surrender, to be still. The world beyond your walls can wait. The snow can fall without end, the wind can howl and rattle, none of it can touch you here. Inside, you are safe. Inside, you are warm. Let your breath match the rhythm of the old fire, glowing steadily, never rushing, never faltering. Each exhale carries away the weight of the day. Each inhale fills you with quiet strength, the same stubborn endurance that carried countless generations through long winters before you. And as your eyes grow heavy, imagine spring waiting patiently on the horizon, buds ready to burst, fields waiting to green, rivers eager to run free again. But not yet, not tonight. Tonight is for rest, for peace, for the simple gift of surviving.